G'day, and welcome back to the next episode of the Life Lid podcast. I'm joined today by yet again another interesting individual, a fellow veteran. He spans an almost 20-year career in the Australian Defence Force with deployments to East Timor, Iraq, and multiple to Afghanistan as part of the 2nd Commando Regiment. He took the ABC to court and won a defamation case against them for allegations of war crimes. He's a founder of the Veteran Games, an advocate for veterans' mental health and veteran suicide. Please welcome my friend, Heston Russell.
Nice clapping.
Heston, welcome.
Jake, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, no, mate. Appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedule. You're a very busy man, from what I understand.
I'm not. People think I'm busy.
Yeah.
I actually have so much time on my hands at the moment.
Oh, really?
I'm up here in Brizzy. Mum had a knee reconstruction. Both knees replaced on Monday.
Oh.
So I'm just up here being a good son, going and visiting her in the hospital.
Oh,
But
sweet.
yeah, I mean, I don't know when this thing will air, but at the moment I have lots of time on my hands.
I mean, it's not a bad place to be in.
Idle hands, the devil's work, eh? I don't know.
I guess.
I love it. Everyone, mate, the algorithm on social media is crushing me at the moment. It's like, if you don't have purpose, work on yourself. Got it. Thanks.
Dude.
Thanks for preaching on me. But I'd prefer to be productive.
Yeah, that's fair. I think most people would prefer to be productive. It's nice to have sort of blocks of time that you have time off, but after a certain period of that, you do kind of go like,
yeah,
what am I doing with my life? What is happening?
No, I'm with you. I mean, it's just purpose.
Yeah.
This whole Royal Commission piece, loss of purpose is one of the biggest issues in the veteran community. Loss of purpose, one of the biggest issues in life where, particularly for most of us that make purpose our identity, it's so easy to not get, a little bit destabilized when you don't have something to sink your teeth into every day.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's very difficult. Like it's absolutely prevalent in the veteran community, but among wider society, like coming out of school, people got no direction, no purpose, no idea what they're going to do. Like it's a burden that a lot of people have.
No,
it's not easy to find.
Yeah, it's common. And look, I do a bunch of corporate speaking and stuff like that, and I go in there. The Royal Commission's key findings are loss of purpose, loss of community, loss of identity. And this whole sort of theory I have about is, this purpose being our entire identity, which is the whole defence piece. Did you come straight out of school into the military?
Oh, I was out about 18 months, maybe 2 years.
And what did you do during that period?
I worked at City Beach.
Oh, there you go.
As a stock
Mate,
manager.
how good was City Beach when we were younger?
Great.
I'd always go there.
Did you work there?
No. That's like the place you go to get your gear.
Yeah. I worked at City Beach, and then I did a bit of waterproofing, which wasn't a trade back then. It was just sort of on the job, and then away you go. So I was subcontracting to waterproofing and construction, and then I worked at a golf factory, just picking and packing golf stuff. Yeah,
okay, but you got that sort of perspective beforehand. My personal theory is the most dangerous situation is going from one institution to the next, so I went straight from high school into the military, and you never really get a tasteful life outside of an institution, outside of where there's all these structures and processes around you, and when your identity is completely wedded to that institution, essentially. You know, school, wear uniforms, all this sort of stuff, straight into the military. And for me, if I had the magic wand, I'd sort of force people to have to do 1 or 2 years outside of school before going into the military. Because I just found, particularly in my crew in the special forces and all that, people who had that little element in between were probably some of the most adjusted. They brought in more of an individual identity at some element. They understood a relationship outside of, again, that infrastructure of a institution as well.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. It was just a theory of mine. But yeah, that loss of purpose, loss of community, loss of identity. And when that purpose is that your entire identity and your entire community, and then that ends, that's the biggest issue. And when I say this stuff to corporates, the amount of people who come up to me afterwards, like be it a real estate crew or, or the white collar financial crew, they're like, hey, replace veteran with us. Like it's the same issue. And they're like, I've been in this corporate job for 20 years. I don't know what to do if I leave. All my group of friends, everything is revolving around this, and the place moves on so quickly.
Yeah.
And it's just that need to establish an identity and friends community outside of that purpose that is just so much of a focus that I sort of find as being that proactive sort of resilience piece.
it's really difficult. Like, especially when you discharge and you come back to civilian life around your friends and family and whatever that you did know, you realize that you've got nothing to talk about.
Yeah.
And you don't, like, you fall into the trap of just talking about the army all the time, and you become that guy that everyone's like, fuck's sake, mate, like, are we talking about the army again?
Yeah.
And it's not through like, oh, I just love it so much I want to talk about it.
Yeah.
You got nothing else. Like, while you're in, that's all you talk about. You talk about the army with the army people in the army. Like, it's
just common, as we all know, like, you like to be able to contribute to a conversation, feel part of a conversation.
Yep.
It's this whole social dynamic of wanting to feel engaged, therefore popular, therefore part of the team. It's funny, mate. I don't know about you, but even like coming into this podcast with you, I'm kind of sick of talking about my military career.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, I find myself at a point in my life where I'm trying to actually kind of move on, and constantly being stuck to what I have done is just not a positive mindset for me.
Yeah.
Having said that, what I am still enjoying is some of the realizations coming from what I have done in a military career and how that can be applied or is relevant to modern day life.
Okay.
Like, there's no sort of directory of you've done this, therefore this is this. You know, I was just recently in the US for 2 months and even talking with some very successful and, business successful, personally successful friends of mine. You know, we're just having random conversations and they're like, you know, that is so insightful. We've never even heard that sort of opinion before. And I was like, oh, that's just sort of common knowledge of my sort of previous life and stuff that I don't usually even talk about. So it's an interesting dynamic, but there's sort of a point, and this is where I'm worried, particularly in the veteran community with everything that's been going on. There's a point where we just continuously hold on to what we were.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's kind of like not resting on your laurels, but it's a place of comfort. It's a place of knowing. It's a place of unique perspective where a lot of people do sit there and listen and pay attention. But there's a point where it's got to be about like sort of today and tomorrow and remembering the lessons for yourself. But I come on this podcast, people always want to talk about my military career, and it's like, cool.
Yeah.
Like, I can talk until the cows come home, but then you sort of get trapped in that past mindset.
Yeah, you don't want it to be all that you are. You want it to be sort of a part of your life, not your entire identity, your entire life. Especially since most of us struggle when we get out with trying to let go and push away from it a little bit without being disrespectful to it or ungrateful for what we have got out of it.
I think it's just putting it in its box. I think the biggest thing is that the military experience for most of us was one of the most motivating environments. You know, you talk about being surrounded by extrinsic motivations, by variety, by like-minded people, by a common sort of selection process, by fitness-minded people, by structure, by all these sorts of things with clear progression, clear feedback, clear communication. Everything was sort of built for the lowest common denominator and was very easily to be understood, but also provided you with potential uncertainty and challenges and explorations, deployments, all the rest of things, while at the same time nested you to this deep intrinsic motivation of service.
Yeah.
You know, even that patriotism to the country, all that sort of stuff. And this is the biggest thing I realized, and one of the biggest things I try and sort of teach to current serving people who are looking at transitioning is you've got to understand that you're working for or have worked for a giant for-purpose organization where you'll be removed for how you do what you do. And the rest of society predominantly is performance-based, as in like KPIs for profit.
Yeah.
You know, whereas you could be the biggest wanker, but as long as you are achieving all these financial outcomes for the business, for the organization, most people will overlook that. Whereas what we know within the military system, that person's actually the worst for culture, because while they might provide short-term financial or profit outputs, long-term, the toxicity of their actions will influence the rest of everyone else.
Yeah.
And just shifting that mindset that, you know, you're going from purpose to for profit, you're not going to achieve the same level of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation and satisfaction as you did. This was a life, you're going into careers and you need to build a life around that.
Yeah.
This is just this whole mindset piece that, I don't know, I'm now 5 years out of transitioning to the military, and it's just taken me almost that long to even appreciate that myself. And you need to find satisfaction outside of employment in order to achieve that same level of motivation.
Yeah.
In my opinion, anyway.
Absolutely. No, I had the first episode I had was a mate of mine, Tommy, also a veteran, but he spent longer in the police now than he has in the army. And he's like, it's the same amongst the cops.
Yeah.
Like, people just make policing fireys, ambos, whatever have you. It becomes your entire being.
Yeah.
Everything about you is about that job. And he's like, if you keep like that, you just burn out.
Yeah.
Like the job will only take. There is no give in the job.
Yeah.
So if you don't put barriers in and leave sort of work where it is and have a life and interests outside, you're done for.
I tell you what, talking about like first responders, police and all that, I have a newfound respect for them, I reckon. Just given that, I deployed Afghanistan 4 times, Iraq, all this. 2012 was like the big one with my platoon where we went out 67 times on missions to capture and kill people. And, every day was sort of death and destruction and all the rest. But you were so well prepared for it. Like you trained up for it. You knew your deployment was coming. You went through a mission rehearsal exercise. We went through things like, writing death letters to our friends, to our families, writing out our will, writing down all of our codes to all of our passwords and everything. And you went over there with a mindset like you're on the job. And then within the Special Forces, we were within Camp Russell. That was a Special Forces base within another base. We didn't have social media. We didn't even have Wi-Fi. There was one landline phone in the platoon lines right outside my fucking bedroom. And the
typical boss, I get the phone.
I didn't build the room. Trust me, I wish it wasn't. I ended up moving it halfway down the hall. I didn't want to hear everyone's conversations all the time. It was interesting though. Yeah. So it helped because the platoon sergeant was across the hallway. So it helped when you heard there were like family issues. I'd send him, we had like pages. I'm like, you've got this. But you didn't have that level of connectivity. You didn't have that, dare I say, disruption of everyday life. Whereas, mate, police, fireys, ambos go out every single day and without warning have to respond to some of the most, heartbreaking stuff, from domestic violence through to suicides, through to, car crashes and all the rest. And, they're not dealing with military people and insurgents. They're dealing with, families and women and kids. And then they have to go straight home. We, even coming back from deployment, went through like decompression processes. You went through psychological screening, all the rest. Each day, waking up, going to work, knowing you could respond to that, having to respond to that, then going home, like the fracture points between, your mental and emotional health and well-being and those you love are just so much closer. It really has given me such a massive perspective. And while we have PTSD and all these mental health issues in the veteran community, our first responders, they have their unions and all that, which are meant to step up and help this. But the amount of people over the last few years that I've encountered and have a newfound understanding and respect for what they go through is just incredible. And I'm fascinated that it doesn't get sort of enough awareness in itself, in my opinion.
Yeah, they all get a bad rap for the most part. The only people love is fireys. They're the only ones that nobody is pissed at fireys. Everyone just loves the fireys.
That's because they do a good calendar, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much.
Good PR.
Yeah. But not only that, like the training for them, like myself being a correctional officer, I've been through the QCS Academy, like the training is not what it should be for most of the people. Like it's okay for someone like myself coming out of the army, we've got a sort of a higher level, and it's not trying to be arrogant, just a higher way of thinking about things and a way of thinking that the normal, Jane off the street who's decided she wants a challenge and to join the job, she doesn't have that background and that base to come from. Yeah. So she goes to the QCS Academy expecting it to, make her well suited for the job. It's really not.
Yeah.
Like you're in an environment where you're probably going to have to throw hands with someone who's bigger than you, more aggressive than you for the most part. And you're doing 5 days of it in a 10-week course? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, pass.
So you look at that. Yeah, the same for the police. I mean, I'm sure they do their best at the academy, but are they coming out of there full bottle, really ready to do the job and really understanding exactly what they're going to do? Those green light moments of when they need to use force, when they need to back off, how to deal with trauma and stuff like that? Or is it kind of the tick and flick course, just get as many through as possible?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, look at the shooting that happened with those poor cops that were killed. I think it was last year.
Out in the country.
Yeah, out in the country. Yeah. And talking to some cop mates of mine who are also veterans, they brought up the point, they're like, mate, at that point, if it's you or me on the ground, we more than likely probably would have been killed either.
Yeah.
But at least we're prepared for that scenario, gunfire. Yeah. Those guys at that point, mate, they're just civvies in uniform. Yeah. They haven't had that same sort of training.
Yeah, right.
And we're starting to get more violent and more sort of civil unrest and stuff in Australia. There's guns and weapons are coming out a lot more.
Yeah.
I think the training needs to be updated to really focus on that and get people prepared that even as a cop in Australia where we don't have the same sort of weapons on the street as America, the threat is there. Like you are still putting your life on the line every day you step into that uniform. And I don't think I could be wrong, but I don't think it's catered for.
It's interesting, even just the mindset piece. Like I usually enjoy the Australian police experience more than I have in the US, given like there is that perception of a lower level threat. Most police I've encountered in the US or observed in the US, like, it's like everyone's got a gun. That's the sort of mindset they have to go into things, unfortunately, in order to preserve themselves, because 9 times out of 10, they're correct. But it's like there's no de-escalation.
Yeah, absolutely.
It starts at high level and it finishes at a higher level if need be.
But it doesn't really have, like, what option do you have?
Oh, no, that's what I'm saying.
I mean?
And that's not a jab at any police. It's like the unfortunate reality.
Yeah.
I mean, even, I spend a lot of time in the US going to, festivals and all this sort of stuff with mates. And it's just such a different mindset. I'm constantly actually hyper vigilant when I'm at those things in comparison to here in Australia. I actually had a good mate come over for Mardi Gras last year and went to there's a big, was it World Pride? I think it was World Pride the year before. And there was the big opening festival in the Domain in Sydney. Yeah. And it was really fascinating just walking in with him. We went through, checking your tickets, and there were the drug dogs and stuff. And he's like, what, no metal detectors? I was like, what do you mean? He's like, this is the first festival I've ever been to where they're not screening for knives and guns. I was like,
welcome to Australia, dude.
I was like, wow. And just seeing how much more relaxed and excited he was, it was really, really fascinating. Yeah. But one thing you brought up sort of before that triggered me beforehand is one thing I think I've realised in a philosophical way is how privileged we are in the military system, just appreciating that ever since the start of civilizations, there's always been some form of military force. And particularly everything from the military planning processes through to, tactics, the principles of the attack, principles of defense, principles of war, all these sorts of underlying academia that we have come from hundreds of years worth of warfare. And we actually had time as an organization to sit there and philosophically plan and debate and exercise and practice all these things in our planning and in our application of combat power and tactics and operations and strategy. Yeah. And how you actually have time to do that when you're not needing to pump through people for, correctional officers and all this. You're not needing to meet a demand. During our time, there was operations overseas constantly, but there was a whole raise, train, sustain piece. There was a time where there was that professional development, that philosophical development, that testing and practicing of theory before it's actually applied, as opposed to needing to punch numbers out to immediately go and do a task. Yeah. I just never fully got to appreciate that until, again, on the outside, where everything is a job statement, a job description, punch out people to meet this criteria, supply and demand, all the rest. Whereas this actual philosophical dwell and development aspect that comes from a professional military force and the evolution of that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
having a philosophical dive there, but
no, mate, I love it.
It was pretty cool.
I'm all about the deep conversations. That's what the podcast is for. So
good.
I enjoy going down the rabbit holes.
Yeah, it's sitting there and analysing warfare from world wars through to initial Boer War, so the guerrilla tactics and all the rest, and also appreciating that things are cyclical, and as technology innovates, the evolution of tactics and theory and all the rest, and the application of force also hand in hand, and sometimes goes back to some of the brilliant basics. And I remember talking to some of my mates currently in the special forces, particularly as technology just ramps up and up and up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes now going on missions without technology, reducing your signature completely is actually what's needed. Yeah, because there's that much technical clutter in the surveillance battle space that you actually become this sort of black spot moving around. I was like, wow. You remember during our days, as soon as it's the latest bit of equipment, we'd want to have it on it.
Yeah, 100%.
These days, that's a technical signature that you might not want to have for that particular mission.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, it's crazy. You look at the Ukraine and the use of drones, drones off Timu, dropping grenades and
mate,
it's nuts.
My last deployment was 2016, 2017 to Iraq. So we had a task force over there supporting the fight against ISIS. Yep. Shits me that most Australians don't even know that, but I was the J5. I was the plans officer in the Special Operations Joint Task Force. Special Operations Joint Interagency Task Force, Operation Inherent Resolve, Iraq.
Fuck,
mate. No. SAGITF-OIR-I. And then I also had a desk where I had to liaise with the crew in Syria. And it was brilliant. It was sort of big world stuff. Like we were helping the crew liberate Mosul. ISIS had Mosul, and they were just like some of the most evil people on earth. I won't go into the sort of stuff that we saw them do, but like just you felt so justified in helping to wipe them off the earth. And even they were so bad that they brought the Iraqis, we had the Iranians, we had all these people, sort of the Peshmerga, all fighting together to get rid of them. But that's when the first drones started to appear. They started to get like off the shelf, quad drones and just grab like the high explosive from a 40 mil and attach a little camera to it. And then they were dropping them on, like Iraqi forces and then straight away uploading the videos online.
Yeah.
And we'd never seen it before. No one had ever seen it before in the battle space. And it was fascinating for me I was in Baghdad at FOB Union 3 with the US Embassy and just seeing all this defense industry enterprise come over to start trialing systems and weapons to interdict these drones, because that was the first time they've ever been seen on the battle space.
Yeah.
Now they're using in swarm tactics and all the rest. But mate, we had people coming over there with ray guns, with net guns. There was a point where trained falcons, like the birds.
What?
Mate, there was a course of action development of having these trained attacked birds to bring down these drones, and they would probably work. But you could imagine it wasn't like it didn't come across my desk. Yeah. But when you're just seeing these people come through, and I would just go and sit in on these briefings and have a listen at the US Embassy, and because like in the UAE, in Saudi Arabia, in the Middle East, like having trained falcons is a pretty big thing. Yeah. They're like, sweet.
That's sick. That's such an epic way to deal with it.
Oh.
Who was like, let's get the falcon. Where's 2Cav? Let's get their fucking their pigeon out and we'll send that over there.
It was actually really unique. I'm not giving away any stuff here, but this is back in the days before people really, I think, truly understood like metadata. It's really been brought out in Ukraine where they upload this stuff and then they drop a bomb. But we would just let these people upload this stuff, and within 10 minutes you would have a drone dropping a bomb on where they'd uploaded it from. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah.
It was pretty cool watching that technology enterprise.
That's nuts.
Kick into gear. It makes you want, like every time you upload a picture or something to Instagram, you're just like, whoa.
Yeah. I remember hearing a story while we were in Afghan back in 2010, 11. They were talking about it's a precursor to sort of metadata, just the ICOM chatter.
Oh, yeah.
And there was some Dutch guys that were trying out like a new artillery piece, and they were like, we'll just pick that mountain, we'll just fire off and just sort of test and adjust it. And they'd fired off a couple of rounds, and then they were picking up on ICOM chatter, Taliban going, they've just missed us. They've just missed us. And they're like, oh, okay. So they just started bracketing off that and ended up wiping out like 30 or 40 Taliban were sitting on the side of this hill. Yeah. Had no idea these guys are just test firing their artillery piece, having a good time, and wiped out a bunch.
Yeah, it's so good. I mean, I have one cool little story. I don't know. I'll get in trouble for it. But we used to listen in on ICOM. We had all these technical things we're not allowed to talk about that helped us find people, but our locals, we always went out. Every mission we went in Afghanistan, we went with partner force. That's been missed out of the entire Afghan narrative. Shits me to tears, We literally had to get approval from our Afghan partner force to go on target. Yep. So when people ask me the question like, were there war crimes committed? Did you see it? I'm like, we were there with Afghan partner force. If we did anything bad, they would have dobbed us in.
100%.
Half the time we had to stop them from, like, they were literally authorized to hang terrorists on the spot. Under their law. We had Afghan special police, and we're like, hey, no, you can't do that while we're around. The worst thing that could happen is for you to be doing that and a picture gets snapped of us in the background allowing you to do this. We just can't do it. Take them back, question them, do whatever you want with them under your own laws. But they would have their own like walkie-talkies and they just sit there scanning like any walkie-talkie can do. And next thing he's picking up on channel 12, some Afghans saying, we can see them do this and do that. And there was one night, one mission, we went into the belly button feature. It was literally like imagine someone had just pressed their finger on the earth and created this giant, depression. Yeah. And we landed in there as a company with like 4 Chinooks, and it was wild. We expected like Canadians had tried to driven a convoy in there the previous year and got blown up. And there was talks of this big underground cave where there were old tanks hidden. And it was the holy grail of combat. How many body bags we're taking in, it was wild. Anyway, So I decided taking some Javelin missile systems. I was like a Javelin instructor, and I love the Javelin.
Yes.
Well, it's
I
like
was DFSW.
mate,
all
same.
about it.
I
Love
was
it.
I was DFSW. We turned it to anti-armor platoon 2 hour when we got the Javelin and 50 cals. But all of these mountains around us were like about 1.5 k's around, and and we're going to be there for 2 or 3. No, we're going to be there for 2 days. And it was cold. I'm like heat signature, good to go. And next thing was one night there, and my Afghan partner force guy is like, "Oh, have a listen to this." And this guy, Taliban, is reporting on the other platoon and where they're moving, and he was like, "Oh, I can see this fire. The Afghans have gone and lit a fire. They're over here. They're over there." And we sort of sat there for 10 minutes, and we're just able to like manually figure out where this dude was. And then I pulled out the clue, the Javelin command launch unit. So for those listening who don't know, it's just a big infrared heat signature, gaming system essentially. Yeah. And next thing, the only, heat signature I see up on that hill is this dude. And
please tell me you hit him with a jab.
So this is it. This is the story. It's funny, mate. The ABC reported, I'll go and remind me at the end to ask me what the ABC said about this story. The old whispers. But the Javelins that I brought in were on an ATV, a 6-wheeled ATV that one of my soldiers drove in. And when we inserted off the back of the Chinook, he drove it off, and he ended up going over a bit of a side thing, and he rolled the ATV with 2 Javelins. Luckily, he didn't have the clues. They were separate. But one of the Javelin tubes got a little crack in it. And I had made such a song and dance back at base to get 2 Javelins. They had to bring them in. Big saga. And next thing I'm like, I'm going to have my ass handed to me if I hand back like a broken Javelin. Yeah. So admittedly, I was probably looking for an excuse. But what I did is I called my JTAC up, the guy who controls the guy who calls in fast jets and stuff for me. And we were meant to have an AC-130 on station, but it had just left. And I was like, hey, when are they coming back? He's like, nah, they're not coming back tonight. I'm like, cool. What can we get on station to drop a bomb on this dude? Like, under the rules of engagement, he's actively participating in hostilities. He was, the physical things he was saying were, they are here, they are there. Send out your people to, and we knew their codes, to arm the IEDs. And we're like, shit, all right, this dude's a spotter. We need to get rid of him. And he's like, hey, look, so we can have some jets brought on station, but they'll literally have to take off from here, take off from there. And I asked him, like, how much would that cost in money to physically get the jets to launch and then drop? And he's like, they'll have to do like whatever formation of 500-pound bombs, given it was like a sheer cliff in order to like make sure they hit this dude. And he's like, mate, it could be anywhere close to like $1 to $1.5 million just to do that. And like a Javelin missile was like between 160,000 to 250,000 Australian. So I was like, sweet. We've just done the business case. But because of the risk of like the round being, I knew it was fine being a Javelin instructor, but you never ever want to like expose someone to risk. And secondly, just in case there wasn't a kickback, I was like, hey, I'm going to take the shot.
All the excuses to pull the tit. I get it.
I moved out to a place where I had 2 buildings either side in case this thing like sputtered in, went on a right angle, would be safe. And I made everyone else stay back. But the Afghan commander, his name was Usman. He was a good dude. He's like, no, I'm sitting with you. And he was there, the one listening on the walkie-talkie. I was like, oh, all right, mate. Sit back here, sit behind me. Not behind me. Sit over here. And he was about a couple of meters over there. And trying to adjust the gates to lock onto one single dude. Well, it was like 1.9 kilometers.
Yeah, that would have been hard.
Big shot.
Yeah.
Javelin missile goes out at 2.5 Ks, but it was like the gates are the closest thing. It's pretty cool. And then direct fire, not top attack. So anyway, launch this thing, mate. The back blast that came out. Commander Usman was sitting on this little wall that was about 2 feet high. He fell off the wall. Thing went off, and then boom, and then he's sitting next to me, and he's listening to the radio. The next thing, someone else is like trying to radio this dude, like, old mate, are you there? Nothing. And then this guy, the other Taliban, is like, hey, everyone, I don't know what happened, but we've just lost so-and-so. Stay off the radios. Don't do anything tonight. We'll reconvene in the morning and figure out what to do.
Yeah.
So shut down all of their spotters that night and stopped doing their thing. And the funny part for me was Commander Usman didn't speak any English. But next thing, all he turns to me is like, dragon, dragon. And from then on, he called the javelin the dragon because of the flame that came. And then my interpreter told me he's gone back to his dudes and he's like, oh, the commander just fired this dragon and it killed the Taliban.
Yeah.
So that was my fun little.
It is funny. What did the ABC say?
So recently had this court case, sued the ABC for defamation. They said that we'd killed someone in Afghanistan when we weren't even in Afghanistan. But part of it, old mate Mark Willisey, the ABC journalist, had all of his diary of notes where he'd gone and spoken with people or he picked up little tidbits of information. And I mean, from that javelin engagement, I got my ass handed to me by my company commander who tried to tell me that it was his orders for opening fire. A javelin missile was a company level asset and therefore he should have been the commander to give the command to release it. I was like, sir, I withdrew this under my own. Like, this is a conversation that never occurred. But apparently he got in trouble from Army headquarters back in Australia because what I didn't factor into my business case was that a javelin missile was paid for out of Australian dollars, whereas a $1.5 million jet was paid for out of US dollars.
Yes.
And I couldn't believe we were having these conversations. Yeah. Like, even with the tactical justification of what we'd actually achieved as far as like neutralizing a spotter operation that night, like I was literally in trouble for it and it was incredible. Anyway, so somehow something got back to Mark Willisey through asking someone that I got in trouble for firing a javelin. But because he has no idea what a javelin is, in his, and then I don't know if I'm allowed to say Chinese whispers, but the whispers turned into like that I just fired it at a bonfire. Like, because someone was probably trying to tell him like fire it at a heat signature. Who knows? Anyway, his journal literally says, Heston Russell got in trouble for throwing a javelin at a fire.
What? Oh, that's excellent.
I'm sitting there and my lawyers, because we had to get all these books that were submitted to the court as a part of the case. And they're like, Heston, what is this part where Mark Willis is saying, you know, you had a bad record because you even got in trouble for throwing a javelin into a fire? And I was sitting there, I'm like, throwing it, just like reverse engineering. I was like, wow, that's like the most uneducated impression of what's happened. But I love that was his official record of why I'd been disciplined for throwing a javelin into a fire.
That's so good. I love that old mate called it a dragon.
Oh, that was his joke for the rest of the deployment. He's like, we prepare for another mission. He's like, are you going to take the dragon? I was like, no, mate. Dragon's been retired. I get in trouble.
It is quite funny that, you know, they, as smart as they are in some respects, just their lack of knowledge of the technological age is quite entertaining at times. Like I remember the blimp at TK was put up while we were there. Yeah. So we went down to the the release ceremony and they sent it up on their chain. It's basically a large blimp with cameras on it. Yeah. Crazy capability, and it was on a chain about 1 kilometer in the air. Yeah. The head of the Afghan forces came along, and we used to work directly under Colonel Crichton, which is the Command Team Zuruzgan guy at the time. Yeah. Funny dude. But the Afghani general was like looking at it, and he was like looking at Crichton, and he's looking back up, and he's like, what is it? And Colonel Crichton, genius, goes, oh, it's a blimp with a laser. He goes, what, a laser? He goes, yeah, it spots, and if it sees anyone doing anything dodgy, it just shoots a laser straight down and kills them on the spot. Oh, wow. And we just watched this guy look at it and just like, is he fucking with me? And then he realized, he's like, well, they wouldn't shoot him. And he just grabbed his arm and was sitting there holding his arm. And Colonel Crichton's looking at him. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, they're not going to shoot you. I'll be safe and hold on to you. I am crying, laughing on the side, watching this happen.
That's sound logic.
Yeah.
That is fantastic.
Genius. Genius. Oh, fuck, I
love Crichton to come up with that laser piece.
Yeah, he was an absolute cowboy.
That blimp was hilarious because you'd have like the radar go off if there was any incoming and you had to grab your body armor and do all this. Yeah. I remember when we were there, 2012, the amount of times that blimp would go up. The next thing, like it's facing back into Camp Russell because we were renowned for not grabbing our body. Yeah. Like so many of us just knew like, hey, if a rocket comes in, I'm going to be mush within body armor and helmet. Like, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go. Yeah. But we literally had to have like stand up arguments with the mentoring task force crew. It's like, hey,
Yep.
we ever find that bloom facing a Camp Russell, we're going to pop it.
Yeah, 100%.
It's not for spying on your own troops.
Yeah. Well, they would do it.
Yeah.
We were hearing over the fires radio that we had troops in contact up the road while we were on task.
Yeah.
And we're getting reports, hey, tell your soldiers to roll their sleeves down. That's not ADM compliant. Look, it's fucking hot. Who cares?
I love it. I have a theory. When there's no battle outside the wire, the war comes within. I mean, what was that? Oh, I can't remember that movie. There's a good US, what was it? Anyway, grooming standards, beards, hats, sleeves rolled down. They were the biggest issues. And look, I get that there is a delicate position between standards and discipline and taking the piss, but yeah.
Yeah. The guys from 6 that we replaced were loose. There was guys running around in cam shorts with just T-shirts, purple mohawk on one dude.
Out at the patrol bases or at
TK?
Oh, that's wild.
It was crazy. Yeah. There was some wild stuff going on with those boys.
That's a bit much.
Yeah.
When were you over there?
2010. We were there September, October 2010.
In Tarrancount or did you go to the patrol?
Nah, through TK.
Did you go out at all?
Yeah. Yeah, we went to, it was lucky. I was with the OGA platoon, the other government agencies. So we went to every patrol base that Australia had and a couple that, we went out to Shinatu, which I believe SOTG guys rolled through there.
Yeah.
We were kind of expecting to get in the shit out there. And then we got out there and we found out SOTG had rolled through 3 days prior. And everyone there was like, would you like some bread? would you like to warm yourself by my fire?
Yeah, good.
How can we welcome you?
Nice. Works. Deterrence is fantastic, isn't it?
100%.
I don't know.
It's disappointing for us. We were looking for a fight, but it is what it is.
It's interesting for me. I'm keen on your insights on this, where I only ever got to experience the special operations side of Afghanistan. So again, we were in Camp Russell and we sat there, mate, and we had all the intelligence in the world. We had, and particularly we worked with the US DEA, particularly targeting drug labs in Helmand. Those poppies to morphine base to heroin were funding the insurgency through to operations all around the world. And they were tracking the money back to here. It was really cool stuff, seeing the fusion of intelligence. We'd have satellites tracking over targets for a few weeks just to pick up patterns through to, all the things you can do with people's mobile phones these days. Even old Nokia flip phones, mate. It's just wild to think. We all think we're in this bubble. If you take your smartwatch off, you're fine. But it's like, nah, you're not, mate. But just all those levels of intelligence. We spend weeks and weeks and weeks fusing intelligence to then go out there and literally capture or kill a guy and his mate. So we might have pictures of them. We might have fingerprints of them from ball bearings, from IEDs that were detonated somewhere. Just the level of intelligence we had. We went out there and physically hunted these people. Half the time we knew where they were within a compound, need be. So we sort of always set the conditions. We sort of set, we were on the front foot. And then so many of the guys, particularly from the infantry units who had to go out on these presence patrols and stuff like that, sort of wandering around and then getting shot at and then sort of being on the back foot. Just what a different mindset that would be. And it really helped me understand a bit more of the issues that some of the more conventional guys have, going out there and, having to be shot at first in order to engage and all the rest. Whereas we were we set the tempo, mate. Yeah.
Yeah. You guys definitely had a much more open ROE and off than we do, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it was, I think our ROE and off was the same, but we were just going after targets.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? You're going on, for argument's sake, a kill capture mission.
Yeah.
You're going and you're like, we're going to be killing someone.
Yeah, they're
it's
bad
happening.
people.
Yeah. We know that anyone there,
if they fight back.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But you're there to prosecute a target. You
Absolutely.
know what's going on. Whereas for us guys, it's just moving around and sort of hoping.
Yeah.
So for me specifically, while I wasn't a patrol base, we were with the OJ platoon. So we were taking out the HVTs, the high value targets, to KLEs for the governor of Uruzgan. We were helping take surveyors out to build new roads and providing protection for them being out. So we were quite a large footprint on the ground.
Yeah.
Especially in the winter period. When all the big players were over in Pakistan training, it was no one was hitting us.
Yeah, gotcha.
Unfortunate for us.
But you're still going out there for a soft sort of activity. You're going out there for a key leadership engagement and stuff. You're not going out there to prosecute bad guys. But at the same time, you need to be on guard. Yeah. You're in a defensive posture.
Yeah.
Whereas we were constantly in an offensive posture. And I just remember the mindset we had going into the target. Everything from, fascinating for me, the whole mindset piece, whether it's preparing for a footy game or what we did to prepare for a mission. even as a platoon, I'd give you give orders the night before, you give confirmatories in the morning. Everyone's in the lines with music playing in front of the mirrors, putting cam paint on.
Yeah.
Half the cam paint was, there's a command and a camouflage and concealment element to it, but there's also just a getting in the game mode. Just like NFL players putting stuff under their eyes. Yeah, a ritual. Checking your gear, checking your maps, checking the loadout, going down to the helicopter line, getting on straight. Like you are dictating the terms, you are setting the tempo, you are following that mindset through to going on the mission. And, you knew as soon as you landed or even as you're coming into land that it was sort of game on. You were going into hostile terrain. And just that alignment it provided you, that sort of flow, that head, body and heart. There was no second guessing what we were doing. There wasn't like, oh, what if? There's the minor tactical stuff of like, if I get a jump on the dude, I need to make sure I abide by my rules of engagement. But, if someone's armed and, justified all the rest, spotters and all that were a bit different. But yeah, there was never any uncertainty. There was really just such a clear highway for decision making from what you could see through to what you could then do.
Yeah.
And that's where, again, I sort of now have the perspective, listening to so many more conventional guys and girls who went there, of just how dislocated and discombobulated and how many U-turns and roundabouts and overpasses there were for people who weren't going out there on the offensive foot. Were going out there to do some of those sort of tasks. And just how much uncertainty that placed in their own individual decision-making cycle, let alone their command decision cycle. And how much space that creates for issues, for doubts, for regrets, for all these other things that it's so easy for many within the Special Forces community to sit back and going like, why are there so many mental health issues with these people who just went out there on a defensive footing? Well, it's because of all the uncertainty that was created by their situation, their circumstances. We were actually extremely privileged through our whole streamline to what we were doing from flash to bang.
Yeah. It was. I remember particularly for me and some of the other guys I went with, I was only 5 months out of Singo when I got on the plane. So I was very, very fresh. Yeah. Wow. And I was the number one gunner, so I had the Mag 58.
Oh,
and I remember,
of course you did.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. We had, I remembered before we went, I can't remember if it was the end of 2009 we were in training or early 2010, but the guys from 2 Commando they were getting dragged over the coals for some collateral damage in a compound. They'd been attacked from a compound. It went hot. They went to breach, grenade through the door. But old mate had a couple of girls.
This is the old 1 Commando.
It might have been 1 Commando.
Yeah, like literally went through the courts.
Yeah. And it was big news. So for me, like personally, I was only 20. I was young. I was only just out of training. Wow. Like in the back of my mind the whole time, I was like I need to be certain. If I pull this trigger, I need to be covered because I don't want to go through war crimes or courts or anything. I want to be covered. I remember seeing we were out for they were doing an agricultural college on this hill outside TK, and the road that we'd come in on, about 150, 200 meters down there, this guy pulled up on his bike and started digging in what we assume was an IED.
Yeah.
And I was like technically, I know we're cleared, we could, but that doubt is sitting in the back of your mind. So we ended up, requesting permission to engage, and they said no. And so we didn't engage. They're just like, oh, we'll just take a different road home. We're like, and we're not going to mark it. We're not going to did nothing. We just left.
Yeah, right.
We just left it. And it's situations like that, I imagine, would haunt a lot of other people in similar situations. You're like, should I have just pulled the trigger and ended it?
Organizational trauma.
Yeah.
I'll dovetail into that with I experienced that when I lost Scott Smith, IED, blew him up 21st of October 2012. We were on a 3-day mission into Helmand in Keshmesh Khan, and it was an incredible mission. We went in there. I had a troop of Abrams tanks from the Marines under my command, and it was just this giant, interesting mission. And what I didn't know leading into that mission was just the previous week, this Marine element, not the actual troop that was attached to me, but just their unit, had been involved in a situation where they'd, long story short, fired their main armament at a truck that was believed to be carrying insurgents, and it was carrying civilians. And from that point forward, the main armament engagement had to be authorized at this level, and just the trepidation for them to ever use that thing. There was just this trauma. There was this trauma where everyone was too afraid to do it. Anyway, we were doing this clearance, and IED went off, killed Scott, and next thing we were under attack from everyone. You can imagine when an IED goes off, giant dust plume, just a giant target, and they knew obviously what had happened, so they just pressed their advantage. And I just remember like I literally had to climb up onto this tank because they turned on their electronic countermeasures, so you couldn't radio through. And the little phone at the back, I tried to get the little phone at the back, they nearly reversed over me. So I ended up like throwing a rock at them climbing up. I'm like, start engaging.
Yeah.
And like right there and then he's like, oh, sir, we can't engage with our main armament unless it's like up here and up here. Yeah. And I was like, turn to some random empty hill and fire that thing, because just the effect of your main gun going off will provide us with that moment I need to regain some tactical initiative.
Yeah, that like, holy fuck moment.
Yeah, just to you know, put some bad dudes back in the little Carezes that were popping out and shooting rockets at us from. It's like, sir, we can't do that. Couple of lessons here. He should have told me that before we went out on this fucking mission.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was really fascinated. But just to see that, well, what happened was like I pretty much cut the tanks away from there. They were useless to me. Apart from firing their coax, what I actually had was another troop of Marines come up and they had their MRABs with like the 40mm grenade launchers and all that, and they just started mowing down insurgents after insurgents for us. It was brilliant. And then I had some Harriers come on, do a low pass, drop some bombs. It was awesome. And I just sort of, I get pretty resentful. I got a bee in my bonnet, and I just put the tanks out on edges because they were bullet magnets. Like the insurgents hit up. I'm like, cool, you can defend yourselves, you know.
Good luck.
Good luck having your coax and whatever. But just by random happenstance, just last year with all this court case stuff, that tank troop commander found me on social media, and we actually did a podcast. It's on my, I think it's on the Heston Russell Voice of a Veteran podcast, where he finally unloaded on how much shame he has carried, like for the past 10 years, sort of wondering if he could have done more, and even tied it back to even preventing Scott's death, which he couldn't. But just really appreciating how much that organizational trauma that comes from that command sort of, what's the word? Impetus? What's it called? Impotence. Yeah, essentially. Has an effect on. And most of this guy's trauma from his combat came from that hesitation on being able to actually fully employ his weapon system based on something else that happened, compounded by me
yelling at him.
But it was great, and we made up, and it was such a great conversation. But it was such really great insights. And I mean, I got to see that again at a massive organizational level when we were over there. And just before Scott died, there was the insider attack, old Hekmatullah, who gunned down 3 guys from the 3-hour battle group. And then unfortunately that same night, our sister platoon, October platoon, I just said it, Oscar platoon, had the Huey crash and killed Merv and Nate. So within a 24-hour period, 5 Australians had been killed. And I literally got woken up at like 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning, buzzer, go into the SOCSI into the headquarters to watch this drone with a Huey on its side and the guys trying to pull Merv and Nate out from underneath it, only to then find out about the 3 Aussies that had been killed. And next thing, this order came from Australia that no conventional forces were allowed out of their bases. Only the special forces element was allowed to go and try and chase down this Hekmatullah dude. And at that time, Oscar platoon was out of action. So it was my November platoon. We got attached to the 2 squadron guys, which is like a troop plus. So there's 50 or 60 special forces people out there trying to cover the entirety of Afghanistan to stop this dude. And he's already had like a 12-hour head start on us. And for the next 3 days, that was the order from Canberra. And I knew the operations officer and operations captains from 3RR, and they just kept coming up, and just seeing how emasculated and just frustrated they were at having an entire battle group at their disposal and not being allowed to go out to not avenge their mate, but do their job to make sure this dude doesn't withdraw back to Pakistan. I just remember that. I've still met guys who were on that 3-hour battle group, and the feeling of not being allowed to go out for 3 days to do their job to support capturing or killing the dude who killed their mates is their trauma from their time in combat. And that came from a place of, we can't risk any more Australian casualties unless they're special forces guys, because we believe the risk is lower for them doing their job. And my guys were in Bushmasters doing vehicle checkpoints and some helicopter operations and all that, but it was just so ridiculous to see the decision making and the risk aversion and the impact that had on hundreds of guys and girls not being allowed to do their job.
We all felt that. I remember actually, I was in my officer NCO course down in Singleton, and I ended up meeting Ian Turner.
Oh, yeah.
He was on his sub 2 for sergeant, and we just got chatting one night, having a couple of beers, and we found out we were both over there at the same time.
You're right.
And he was talking about SOTG going through and doing a clearance of whatever village it was, or valley, wherever, pulling up at the end of it. He's like, we're sitting on the thing, end of battle, we're having a brew, just chilling out. And he goes, then we looked down and we watched 5RAR roll through and start doing a clearance on that village. And he's like,
dear.
we just fucking did this. Like, why are we even doing this stuff that's probably basic infantry tasking? You guys are capable of handling this. You should be given the reins to do so, and we should be off doing more specialized tasks as special forces.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that's sounds like our experience.
Mate, my theory on Afghanistan was it was one of the best training grounds for us, but it was the worst campaign for the wider defence culture within Australia. Because what happened was it just bred resentment between conventional forces and special forces.
Yeah.
I got to see that after my deployments when I went and did like my promotion courses for major and stuff at Canungra. And there were people that were 1 or 2 years ahead of me going through ADFA and RMC, senior in rank to me. And just there, when people have an issue like they're protecting or projecting any insecurity, their insecurity is about talking about, what they actually did in Afghanistan in comparison to what we did, not because it was their own capable limits, but it's because what they were allowed to do. And the reality was, you're 100% correct. Like so many of the missions we did were not special forces missions. The only reason why they were special, because the approvals chain saw we were special forces and therefore it made that equivalent to a lower risk of casualties. And what happened was the conventional guys and the conventional officers in particular would see, because they get all the mission reports back in, they're like, we could be doing this shit, we could be doing this shit. And instead of talking to us about it, they're just breeding this in-house resentment towards us.
Yeah.
And every time I had a conversation with them, it was like, mate, absolutely. The amount of times missions came to us and we were like, hey, let's give this to the battle group. I was like, that's not their role. Their role is, mentoring and training and reconstruction and all the rest. And all that it did, and unfortunately, mate, what happens was so many of those conventional officers that were at that level have then stayed in and risen to the ranks and have just harbored this chip on their shoulder of wanting to constantly get back at special forces in some way. And I think it's more of a subconscious thing for many of them that I've come across. Some of them are very overt about it, but it's like, mate, we didn't pick our missions all the time. We actively tried to give this stuff to you. There's a breakdown in conversation here. We were kept completely separate, but all of these issues that have now become your culture and your resentment, and mate, the pile on that you've seen occur on special forces culture and this, that, and the other that's occurred from that, the fact that the wider defence force hasn't been stepping up to support it. There is even people like Angus Campbell, the former chief of defence force. People don't know, like he's persona non grata from SAS. Like he was removed as a company commander, or in some regards. And I have people from SAS telling me these sorts of things. You get to trace back through what's happened to these people's career, and so much of this has culminated with this whole Brereton report and Afghan inquiry and all that, of how people have happily let special forces be attacked as opposed to coming in and providing a sort of cohesive front to it.
Yeah.
And there's so many lessons to be drawn. Like if you're going to deploy people, deploy them to do their job, deploy them in their job they're going to use, and be aware of what happens when you don't, from the 3RR people who weren't allowed to go out and do their job for their mates through to the dysfunction that even, mate, everyone talks about the culture between SAS and 2 Commando. It was terrible because we were overlapping roles where either of us could have done because there wasn't that strategic maturity to say, no, you do this, you do this. And there were so many jobs coming through and all the rest.
Yeah.
But again, that was 2012.
Yeah, it's a long time ago.
Yeah. This is my issue with the whole Brereton report and all that, where it's talked about the culture between SAS and 2 Commando. Mate, 2015, 2016, when I was still there in the units, the amount of cultural changes we went through to help re-roll people, just the evolution of operational capability that developed after Afghanistan, to then have it all washed up again as if culture as is what it was back in 2010, 11, 12. People just miss this point completely, but that's the government narrative, and there's been no senior people from defence talking up to sort of correct that as well.
Yeah, judging the actions of yesterday by today's
Oh,
standards.
mate, what killed me with that whole Brereton stuff is people talking about, the culture of SAS, the culture of commandos. Like, are you talking about today or are you talking about 10 years ago? Like, have some perspective.
Yeah.
but they just read a document and take it as gospel.
Yeah.
And because of the way in which defence operates, and particularly SOCOMMAND, but defence is meant to represent it. Like they weren't on the front foot with their messaging.
Yeah.
And instead it's, close house, arms distance, all the rest. And anyway.
Yeah. Going back to Scott, was that the first soldier under your command that you lost?
In combat, yes.
Yeah.
My first deployment was as a 21-year-old platoon commander in Aputure to East Timor.
Yeah. Right.
And during that deployment, I had a soldier, Ash Baker, actually take his own life.
Wow.
Yeah, he shot himself in the head in one of the ablution blocks. So that was actually the first soldier I lost under my command.
Wow.
And that was probably, that was quite an experience.
Yeah. What was that? Talk me through that.
Well, that was 2007.
Yeah, early.
2007? Yeah, 2007. Like I said, mate, I was 21.
Yeah.
It was a few days before my birthday. It was in November. And I'm ashamed I can't remember the date, but it just jumped on me. But yeah, I, fresh out of all your training to become a platoon commander, peacekeeping operations. So most times we were walking around with our weapons slung, not even, I taught English at the local Timorese school once a week, and it was all about key leadership engagements. And from a human terrain element, it was one of the best deployments for me and harder than any Afghan deployment, just from the multifacets you had to have, from diplomat through to, peacekeeper and all the rest. And I remember this, and I've said this a number of times publicly, I just remember being so ashamed. I remember being embarrassed. I'd lost a soldier by his own hand on a peacekeeping operation, and as a commander, that was my responsibility. And there were a whole bunch of circumstances surrounding that. Ash had... my platoon sergeant and I, we sort of had platoon, you lived in like shipping containers that had, an air conditioner attached to them and bunk beds in it. So me and the platoon sergeant were in one, and most of the other sections, there were 4 people, and they were like double stacked shipping containers in like a U shape around a common area. That was your good old, like sort of, I don't know, Balinese palm thatched roof. It was pretty cool. Yeah. And we woke up in the morning, and in the common area in the middle, there was a weapon, an F-88 Steyr there with its magazine and everything. And, next thing the platoon sergeant grabs it, and section commander comes down because he knew whose serial number it was, and it was Ash's. And so called him down, and with the platoon sergeant reprimanded him, and his retraining was he had to carry his weapon with him everywhere. Whereas usually within the base, when you go to the ablutions, you never had to carry your weapon with you. You could leave it in your room. Yeah. And that was in the morning. I went and worked out at the gym, and I was literally coming back, walking back like the other side of the helipod in Dili, and this vehicle with my sergeant pulls up. He's like, "Boss, get in. Ash has shot himself." And I was like, "Oh shit, an accident. What's he done?" And he's like, "No, he's killed himself." It's like, whoa. So yeah, turned up, and we had to sort of secure the scene and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I just remember the rush of emotions was I was embarrassed. I didn't know how to handle it. And the next thing, we just went straight into the whole official process of, what were they called? I can't remember, the ADFIS, the Defence Investigations people turned up. And it was an interesting time. It was my first ever encounter with mental health and suicide. And this is 2007. It was, in my mind, mental health and suicide was like a predisposed condition. You were born with it, something happened to you, you were molested as a child, something like that. My grandfather fought in Korea and Vietnam, and so I had some good insights into that. But, that was sort of jungle warfare, PTSD, combat, Viet Cong, like hardcore stuff. We did some jungle training, and I even say, I would take Afghanistan any day over jungle warfare and what they went through in Vietnam, mate.
100%. I did RCB, and it was fucking horrible.
Mate, going through prickly heat, punji spikes, all the rest. Yeah, no thank you. So I guess mental health and PTSD was kind of like that acute combat trauma from such incredible warfare type stuff, or you heard of the shell shock and all that from the World Wars type stuff. So this is the first ever time that I'd been presented with this, and Ash was younger than me. And so straight away, my thought was, we've done this. Because we made him carry his weapon, because we got him in trouble, we'd done this. And I remember carrying that through to me. Long story short, that day, everything sort of wrapped up, isolated it, did everything we needed to do with ADFIS. They took over. And we went straight back on operations. During that time, a few weeks later, the president and prime minister there was an assassination attempt on them by Ronaldo, and we were the quick reaction force platoon, and we started doing operations to help do all this, and it was straight into operational tempo again. And then all of a sudden, all that ground to a halt, and I had to get flown back to Darwin with a group of my mates and front a whole defence inquiry into his death. And it was only then, before the inquiry, where I really started to get, they had people come through from his high school and all the rest, and there was so much more to the personal picture of this guy that I never fully appreciated. And I finally got to have more of an appreciation of all the different elements to go into, a person's mindset, and as opposed to what happens in that sort of final moment, just appreciating that there are so many other levels and layers. And particularly for me as a young platoon commander, Ash had been a very difficult person for me to connect with because he wasn't a high performer. I'm sort of someone who, straight out of the college and all that, always maintained a professional distance, would not have personal conversations with my guys, maintained. I needed to do that because it was so easy for me to be drawn into and potentially pay favoritism to people who were good characters, but also good at their performance. So I always maintained that. And Ash particularly wasn't a high performer, so I maintained even more of a distance, and I probably knew less about him personally than I knew about the majority of my other guys in the platoon. And it provided me with a really great insight that in order to be an effective leader and truly look after my guys, I actually needed to figure out a way to fully and completely understand them, but more so connect with them on a personal level, not just a professional level. And particularly back then, as a young 21-year-old platoon commander, mate, I don't have any life experience to bring to talking to blokes about their relationships and all the rest.
Especially if some of them are older than you as well.
I mean, most of them were, but Ash was one of the younger guys. I really connected on a personal level with most of my team. I used to run platoon PT and do all that. I always would make sort of professional activities, the way in which we sort of connected, but you were still just doing it on a professional level. You might laugh and carry on, but it's never like, hey, what do you like to do outside of work and all this? They were just questions. You'd never go out drinking with your soldiers. That was sort of taught at ADFA RMC and all the rest. But just finding ways in which I could get to understand some more of the intrinsic and extrinsic motivators behind my guys, to identify any potential red flags. It was the first time, I think, during that whole inquiry that I got introduced to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and actually understanding that sort of the true elements of identity, what you need for survival, what you need, employment, all this self-actualization.
I've not heard that before. What is that?
Oh, you're going to test me on the spot. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is this pyramid where there's all these different levels and layers, and it's about your survival, your belonging, your relationships, all the rest, and achieve self-actualization at the top. So things like, food, shelter, all the rest, through to employment, relationships, status, and all these things. And some organizations, and personally, even within our charity that we use it, where there's one or two layers that start to get issues with them at the same time. So someone has a relationship issue, and then they also have, they lose their job, straight away, that's a red flag, because there's two levels or layers of Maslow's hierarchy that are being disturbed. Right. So someone, might need to move out of their place. And then we had a guy where his service dog died. Again, two layers of that pyramid are being disrupted. Someone needs to get over there and connect with this guy, because we know that is the elements and layers that can lead to just this destabilization of the whole bits and pieces. And it helped me appreciate that very rarely is there one individual action that leads to it. It's a culmination, and particularly multiple levels or layers of that Maslow's hierarchy that are targeted and cause those issues. So I sort of took it upon myself to start to learn, make sure you're truly understanding what their housing situation is. People are falling behind on rent, or they've had to move back onto base because they couldn't afford rent. There's something going on in there. Link in with their platoon sergeant, link in with their section commander, find out what's going on, and make sure you're putting that on their platoon commander's notebook. It's a red flag. If then you hear about their relationship breakdown, another red flag. All right, we need to start looking at some sort of personal coaching or personal mentoring. Getting a senior soldier to actually go and check and connect with this guy on the weekends and sort of things like that. And not just purely from a suicide prevention perspective, but just from a mental health perspective. Because again, as you would know in the military piece, when the culture of service is putting the mission and team before yourself. So too often you have to reach in to pull out these personal issues that are going on with people. And if you can do that from a surveillance, difference between surveillance and reconnaissance. Surveillance is broad brush reconnaissance is finite, is specific. So just having your surveillance tuned into those sort of Maslow parameters and being able to collect that information to then put your target reconnaissance, put your guy on that person to make sure that there's some stability while the structure's being destabilized. That's sort of something that's helped push me through my whole career. And also to really appreciate so much more in my transition out of defense. Particularly for me, transitioning out of defense, I ended up leaving the defense because I became disillusioned with the organization, particularly in Iraq, seeing how big the stuff we were doing and then how little the stuff I had to spend my time debating with people back in Australia on. I was in love in a secret relationship with a dude, and I wasn't comfortable being the first gay commando, let alone the first gay commando officer. And I was still so caught up on identity, coming down to so many of those labels, like being a commando, being gay, all these other sorts of things, even though I had this whole Maslow's hierarchy perspective piece. So, it's been fascinating for me to pull apart identity from the different layers society likes to put on us and actually make sure that identity is more so focused on that Maslow hierarchy. And as we go through transition periods, as you go through relationship breakdown and financial issues and all this, to just be tracking on your own pyramid, hey, I've got an issue here. It looks like I might have an issue here. Who do I have within my community, which needs to be that barrier around you that I can reach out to and just say, hey, look, I'm actually having issues with this or this or this. And it's your own sort of initial checkpoint. It's worked for me.
Yeah. It's an interesting thing that the reaching out to someone else is something that I think a lot of us find very difficult.
Oh, yeah.
And I think I had to look at this. I had to do a speech. I've mentioned it before. I had to do a speech on mental health for a charity thing a while back. And I started to look at a little bit more about like suicide prevention and that sort of thing. And the barriers to actually reaching out to someone, you know, before you get to the point where you're suicidal, but anywhere on the lead up. And it kind of led me to this understanding like life is tough. It's tough for everyone.
Yeah.
You know, there are some people that get an easier ride than others, but for the most part, life can be pretty shitty at times, and it's tough for everyone. But it is particularly tough on men. There's a lot of pressure societally and just the way that the world works on men in general. And we all know intrinsically how tough it is for everyone else. So when I'm having a shit time and I might not have talked to you in, 2 or 3 months, we just lost contact, life gets busy. I don't want to call you and be the first time that we talk. I'm like, hey man, I got all this shit I need to dump on you. Because I know that your life's already difficult. You've already got a bunch of other shit you're dealing with. I don't want to lump my shit on you. So you become more of a burden. So you isolate even more. Yeah. And that was a concept that I was like, we really need to start prioritizing connecting with people, even when it's not shit. Yeah. Like keeping those connections so that you don't have that burden. You can get rid of that barrier immediately that, we've talked like 3 times this week. Yeah. I am having a tough term, dude. Yeah. Like, do you want to grab a beer or something like that?
It's a mindset shift. See, I sit here having this conversation in a place where I know now I have people I can reach out to. I have friends that I have been trauma dumping on. I recently went through just like a relationship thing that just rocked me to my core. I was all 100% all in just to get, anyway. And I have taken up like a month's worth of people's time in conversations, and I've never been used to being that person to need support from others. I've always been the person that have loved people being able to come to me, and I find that people always seem to come to me with problems and issues, and I love to be able to hold the space and have those conversations with them. But I think it's because I personally have been through, when this whole ABC stuff started, mate, I went from like a big group of friends and former prime ministers on my podcast and all this sort of stuff to reaching out to people asking for help and just getting no responses. And my world and my circle became this small, and it was so tough being in that lonely place. But what it did was it helped to declutter all of the excess baggage from my life who were just there for the good times, and find a core group of people, and actually brought in people who saw that I was struggling and really were there for me. And I guess it forced me to develop relationships that are actually built on vulnerability. We love this word, vulnerability. And these are people that I know I can call in my darkest times, and they can call on me. Or there are people who will see that I haven't posted on social media, or will just pick up on that vibe, and they're sort of connected to your energy in some way to do that. And I think some of that has come from my experiences in the gay community. The gay community is unique in that at the core of it, it comes from a very vulnerable place, connecting on a level of sexuality, and particularly a place where the majority of us have either rejected us ourselves or been rejected by others at the most vulnerable level, which is your sexuality. And, you know, mate, I spent most of my career trying to train myself not to be gay because I'm like, mate, I'm fucking special forces. I can figure out how to do this.
Interesting.
Oh, mate. Do talk through some of that. It's a long process, but
Yeah.
once you finally get
go
to
as much
once you
detail as
finally
you
get to a place of self-acceptance and then not requiring the acceptance of others because you actually know who you are and meet others who've been on that same journey and you connect at a level of responsibility, not entitlement. Like some of my best sort of friends have come from that, but it also forces you to go through like this emotional intelligence evolution where like the most difficult part for me was trying to put together the piece that is like the hyper masculine expectations, particularly coming from the special forces. Like as a platoon commander, your call sign was alpha. Like literally, I was November Platoon. My call sign was November Alpha. Going through selection, going through the year's worth of training, it's like you are the fucking alpha. You know, you are in charge, which is right. At the end of the day, you are responsible, but not entitled. I remember one of my first missions in Afghanistan, 2012, was to go and do this reconnaissance task ahead of a mission where we're going to bring in a company of commandos and have SAS doing some recon stuff and support. I go out to the helicopter, and there was the SAS company commander, Will, who's a really good dude, and there's Ben Robert Smith, who's like 6'7".
Yeah, he's a beast.
Right, his weapon looked like a pistol, and I just remember one of the senior instructors going out there, like, just remember, boss, like there's going to be two Saskats out there, but like this is our mission and you're the alpha. He's like, just remember going out there, and I hated this whole alpha thing. Like from the start, it just wasn't in my DNA. Like it's competence and character. It's not status and positions. I was like, fuck, I wish the guys could just like, yeah, I'm going to out alpha male Ben Robert Smith. And it really, when I finished my career, mate, I ran the selection course, and my job was to help train the officers at the end of it. And I developed this thing called the alphabetical male. Like you need to be the alphabetical male. If you are sitting there in a pissing contest trying to be the alpha male, you have completely lost sight of the mission, the task, the purpose. Your job is to achieve the outcome. However, you need to accelerate and de-accelerate your competence and character in order to get your point across. You know, the amount of times people get into these pissing contests, these yelling matches, these battle of the wills, it's like, hey guys, this is the purpose. We're insignificant to it unless we're achieving the outcomes. So dissolving this whole hyper-masculine piece, and, you know, like we're commandos, it was a unit full of all men, you know, and that was, women were allowed to apply for the selection. They just never passed it. And it was this hyper alpha male. There were no outwardly gay men or the rest. And I'd never been introduced to any gay men until I moved to Sydney. And what I met was Oxford Street, and which was, I say this a lot, which was midriffs and drag queens and this other sort of feminine side that I've never exposed to, never used to, didn't understand, didn't appreciate. So then for me to transition out of that military special forces environment to being in the gay world, the only reason why I did it was because 2015 I was posted to the Rangers in the US for a year, and I started to go to places like LA and New York and run into professional gay men that I didn't know were gay until someone else told me. And I sort of learnt that you could actually be your own person. You didn't need to be defined by the label that was your sexuality, whereas all I'd ever seen was people who were so defined by their sexuality from whatever trauma they had been through and were forced to do so. But then again, when I transitioned from the military, I left military completely away and went straight into my relationship with my partner, brought barriers to Australia, did all that. And instead of bringing the two together, I forced them apart. And it was only actually during this ABC court case stuff where there were naked OnlyFans pictures of me and all this whole story came out that I was forced to push the two together. And that's, again, where I finally got to this place of like true vulnerability, where I got to remove all the different labels and just come down to like, you know, who you are at your strongest or at your weakest. But particularly for me, the proactive layers of resilience and crisis support have come from the relationships I've built based on vulnerability. And it's not always about trauma and issues and I need your support.
Yeah.
It's like when you really are at your lowest, who is there for you? And then being there for them at the same. And then when you're at your highest, like I found with those all same people, like the celebrations are so much sweeter because you are able to be at the lowest low, then they're going to ride the high with you as well and deserve to be there, as opposed to, mate, all the people you see flock when the going gets good.
Yeah. It's like the number one Tinder bio I see of women. It's like, if you can't take me at my worst, you don't deserve me at my best.
Oh, I love it.
And look, to be fair, they are right to a degree, but I'm like, oh, fuck's sake. Like, I don't have no other one.
Mate,
Think of something original.
And this is where I love.
Yeah.
Like the last few years have been an interesting roller coaster for me. Like I told you, when the ABC stuff started and the support network just dropped off the face of the cliff, through to then when I won in like the federal court last year, and all of a sudden all these messages and phone calls came through, mate.
Been rooting for you, bud.
Oh, mate.
Silently cheering
What
you
do
on.
they say? Elephants like have the best memory. Oh, mate. There's a little black book. No, there's not. There's just... But
there's some names carved in the school desk getting crossed off.
I think what I have learned though, and I think I'd love your insights on this because potentially it's a military thing as well, is that we are so used to people that we call friends being at this standard that covers off on everything. You know, someone that we would pick to be on our team at our worst and at our best. And I think I've really struggled to, one, find people who meet that standard. Instead of recently over in the US with some of my mates, I was having some of these conversations and it's like, hey, sometimes you just sort of appreciate that person is that person to you and put them in that box. And they might be the fun party person, but you know they're not going to be there when the going gets tough. Whereas particularly operating out of trauma, which is what I have been these last few years, all this sort of bullshit, it's so easy to be like, nah, you weren't there for me when I needed you.
Yeah.
Like, fuck you. I'm going to have nothing to do with you. And I hope you get hit by a car when you cross the road. No, I'm kidding. Not hit. Just
so
like,
aggressive.
No,
just bump.
Just splash.
Bump.
No, splash with a puddle when you're wearing some good clothes.
Yeah.
But I think like you were saying before with me, perhaps before we started talking, like you don't know what's going on in that person's life.
Yeah.
So to expect them to know what's going on in your life and balance what they've got going on and be there for you, like it takes a lot of energy to be there for yourself sometimes. And it was, again, my mate Charlie who actually really had this really insightful philosophical conversation for me. I think, again, in the military where we're so used to like you're either on the team, you're on the standard or you're not, you're gone. And even again in special forces, mate, if you didn't abide by these values, we'd remove you even if you're the top shot in the unit. And how much that has precipitated through to my personal life where I found it so hard to tolerate people, let alone put them on my friendship list or maintain them on my friendship list if they don't meet all of these values and criteria I have. And at the smallest sight of them going against any of those, you know, I'll remove them. And all that's ever done is actually leave me with a very small group of people that admittedly will be there for everything. But every now and then you need those people to help you be in the moment, be silly, go and have fun. And I'm still working through at the moment. I find it so hard to actually, you know, allow myself to do that.
Yeah, I'm very much a big proponent of keep your circle small.
Yeah.
The people that I for sure
But
have
that's
trust
just,
issues.
that's your circle of how much you allow them in.
Yeah.
But just appreciating that there's so much more you might
absolutely.
need to.
Well, there's a lot of people in my zeitgeist, I suppose you could use the word.
What is this word?
Zeitgeist, just in my sort of
Environment,
my little world, my little bubble.
Love that.
There's a lot of people that would be like, yeah, Jake's a friend. And I'm like, yeah.
Oh,
We'd be like, oh, we're acquaintances.
yeah.
You're not someone, like I know, like you're not someone that I would call
Yeah.
if I was in it. But, you know, like I might come to your party and, you know, we'll hang out. And look, we're going to have a good time and I'll talk to you and whatnot. But we're not getting deep. It's going to be surface level because I just don't trust you enough to get that. You've not showed me in what we're doing a level of me trusting you. The people that I trust with stuff is very small, very,
And
very
do you
small.
enjoy that just surface level conversation?
Look,
Sometimes you just need it because you don't want to go deep. Or
yeah. It's one of those things. It's life. It's a fucking journey, dude. And it's sometimes it's fun to have surface level conversations and just fuck around and have a joke. And you can do that with the people that you really trust as well.
Yeah.
But I do enjoy deeper conversations.
Yeah. I'm with you.
And I'm happy to have deeper conversations with even those people that are sort of those acquaintance, surface level friends. But we're not probably going to go down the rabbit holes of my life on it. Like we can have a deeper conversation about the world and what's going on, and this and that. We can get deep on in our views, but we're probably not going to go down the let's really get to know each other on a deeper level, and to a point where I think that if I call you, I'll answer because something along the way has triggered that I'm like, I don't think you would.
Yeah.
I think you say you would, but I reckon if I called, if it was past your bedtime, you wouldn't answer.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
That's it. Well, it's usually someone shown through their actions. Yeah. No, I'm with you. I find it fascinating. I mean, this is my therapy 101. I was like the fat, unpopular kid at high school. So particularly in the military, you go into this environment where all of a sudden, like I was good at my job, so you become popular because of your job, but also everyone's forced to be in a team. It's perfect for the unpopular kids. And there's this whole, I think, theory behind the military, particularly combat corps, attracting like the Peter Pan lost boys. And we're actually the ones that have the most potential for mental health issues, going from a fully self-actualized, immersive environment back to social life. But I remember going through these periods where, like, even as an adult, my ultimate for like a birthday is I just want a room packed full of people celebrating me. Whereas these days it's like, man, I'm happy for like a small table of like dinner with people that I actually want to be there and value their time and sharing my time and like sharing a meal with them. And I'm just worried I'm going down a trajectory of just being a hermit in my home with my sausage dog, and that's about it.
I think that's most of us. That's most of us as we get older.
I don't want to be that person, Yeah.
No, I'm very similar. I don't want a big fuss for my birthday. I've got no interest in going out and doing a big thing. I would prefer that people just go, hey mate, happy birthday, and move on. And that's the whole thing. I like to be the center of attention when it's my call to do that. If there's a funny situation, I think of a quip and I can throw it out and everyone can have a good laugh. I'm the center of attention for about 3 seconds.
When it's earned. Exactly. When it's earned, It's earned. I don't feel like birthdays are earned. I call my mum on my birthday. I'm like, thank you for doing a lot of hard work on this day.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'm like, all I did was not die this year.
But
that's all I did.
It is funny because a lot of my mates in the US really celebrate birthdays really well. And I do enjoy it because I find it so hard to find things to celebrate. I think, again, going from like levels of high performance and all that, you've sort of seen some amazing things that are worth celebrating but don't get celebrated. So it kind of removes the joy from it. But I actually envy people who are able to sort of find that way to celebrate. And I think that's part of finding those good friends who will help remind you to celebrate. Because I know I'm a perfectionist, so I don't feel like you that I deserve to be celebrated on my birthday like I did nothing. But some people want to celebrate you. And I think part of it is finding people who help bring out that joy. Otherwise we can become those bitter old men sitting on our porches cussing at people walking past.
Oh, I do that all the time.
Do you?
No, not on the porch cussing at people, but I'm definitely getting older and crotchety. For
How
sure.
old are you?
34.
Oh, settle down.
Dude, it's going downhill.
No,
quickly.
No, mate.
Quickly.
Mindset. Let's give it a break. I've got to pee.
Yeah, dude, I'm with you. I've got to pee as well. We'll be back in a second. All right. And we're back.
Job's on.
Back. Yeah. So, what were we talking about before we left?
Oh, hard to say.
That's right. I had a question. You were talking a bit about your sexuality within commandos and the army and being closeted and kind of hiding it. Looking back on that now, do you think that if you had come out then, it would be as bad as you probably built it up with in your mind at the time?
It just wasn't a priority for me.
Okay.
And I'm at an extreme place of comfort for that. And as much as we would love to pontificate that it wouldn't have been an issue, deep down, subconsciously, like I was homophobic and people are homophobic. And it was just not a factor that needed to be any part or presence of my professional career. And the interesting snapshot for me was when I was in the US 2015 is when I fully became comfortable with it. And I even flew up to Banff and told my sister, and then I told my mum. But back in Australia, they were starting to ramp up the conversations of the gay marriage vote. And very quickly I started to see a societal shift when I then went back to SFTC in 2016 of this desire to recognise diversity and from the place of to demonstrate being a part of diversity. So defence started to like really promote diversity and gay and all the rest, to the point where it was potentially perceived that being gay would be an advantage to potentially achieve more attention, progression, all the rest, which straight away went straight against my personal and professional values of ever having anything that I didn't earn.
Yeah.
And so I was really stuck in this juxtaposition of wanting to feel professionally accepted, but never, ever, ever wanting to ever be seen to progress in any way based on something that was, you know, my sexuality.
Yeah, not performance based.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was at the same time where we were really under the hammer to have women on the selection course. And me as the OC of the training center, I was told, like, you need to reserve this many spots for women. It was a real interesting cultural shift. Bit of a sidebar, but the way I got around that was the way I didn't get around that. The way I came to terms with that is we had a whole bunch of women support staff within the unit. We just got together and had a bit of a town hall, and some of them wanted to apply for selection. And I was like, hey, what would you say if I told you we were told to reserve this number of positions? And the amount of them said, like, don't you dare undermine our ability to earn our position. Like, for us to know that we're on that course because the standard is lowered, you're undermining our entire potential future career should we pass. And I just brought senior leaders in to have that conversation with them, and the quota was removed. So there were all these different things going on that just went against the earned culture of your actions and attitude getting you into being what you are and progressing within your military career, that it just, for me, I didn't want it to be a potential element. So I just continued on personally. But one of the most powerful parts of the story I love to tell is that eventually when, you know, a few years later after I did get out, I ran into old guys from my platoon and all that who did know that I was gay. Just the amount of guys who had this conversation, who said, hey, boss, we wish you felt more comfortable saying that you were gay. To know that there was any part of you putting energy into potentially trying to hide any part of that as opposed to applying it to your job is incredible for us to think about, you know, because the job is so authentic and accountable and all the rest, and just takes so much energy. You know, I was in combat with these guys, and a large part of me even being afraid of telling my soldiers from November Platoon that I was gay after I came to terms with it publicly was some of them had been so vulnerable with me. Like, there was one guy in my office bawling his eyes out, you know, fitter, stronger, faster, older than me, more deployments than me. His wife had just taken off with the 3 kids on the deployment, and he'd been so vulnerable with just me and the platoon sergeant and not the rest of the platoon. And I felt deep down it was situations like that where some of the guys would have felt that I'd been lying to them in some way by not being my true, authentic, vulnerable self with them. I'd manufactured that story in my head. But for these guys to say, like, you know, appreciating the level of high performance, elite performance we were at, to know that you were putting 1, 2 or 5% of your energy into feeling like you needed to hide your sexuality. We're sorry that that was the case, but it's just also incredible to think that you're able to sort of do that as well as the job as well. And it's a fascinating insight for me. It's this whole authenticity piece I try and talk about. And I just wasn't ready. I'm the person who kept myself in the closet for those variety of reasons. But just appreciating here and now the person that I am today, accepting myself and putting my energy into what is my real identity, just how much more complete I feel as a person. And then if I had this level of alignment in my time within the military, if I had it again in the same circumstances, potentially how much more better I would have been as a person, as a professional. You know, there's a lot of hypotheses there, but all I can do is sort of carry that forward. And it's taught me a lot of lessons. You know, people talk about representation, diversity, all these sorts of things, and I was always so against them. It's about like diversity for a purpose, equality of opportunity as opposed to equality of outcome and all the rest.
Very important distinction.
Yeah, massive distinction. It's actually an Australian value, but we look over it. And also appreciating that many people that I've encountered from the gay community are operating from a place of trauma, are taught that it's an entitlement as opposed to responsibility. And just per any demographic of society, it comes down to who's around you, who are your mentors. I had some great mentors. I had some great people that I got to look up to and sort of see a version that I wanted to be. And not everyone has that opportunity. And again, when we live in a society where it is often easier to progress if you are different in some way, stand out from the crowd in some way that isn't just based on actions and attitudes, you can see how, at the end of the day, you have to represent yourself in the society.
Yeah.
And until society changes, people are just doing the best they can to survive and thrive within it. So, I don't have the answers to it. I just have my own personal experience and the lessons I've taken away from that. And one of the most positive things I've found from the whole journey has been even just talking about these sort of conversations with you and on other podcasts and whatnot, the amount of people from the Australian military or other militaries around the world, particularly other Western militaries around the world. I get guys in the US military, the UK military throughout the last few years who've just said, hey, like you've helped me appreciate I can be like my own version of being gay and in the military and being able to still focus on what are my values as opposed to what, might be the perceived values external. And that's sort of been one of the biggest takeaways, but that's only come from me being comfortable with it as opposed to anyone else, saying, why didn't you do it back then?
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing too. Like the theme of sexuality and something like that. Like it's, some people I feel like they take it and it becomes all that they are. Like that's their whole defining factor is that they're gay or lesbian or straight or whatever. Yeah. It's such a foreign concept to me to be like that. Like it's such a small, you know what I mean?
Some people do that with being a veteran, mate.
Yeah, exactly.
Their whole identity. True. So this whole identity conversation. Yeah. Society, particularly the Western world, the what's the world? The commercial world. It's what is your label? What is your label? What is your packaging on the shelf that we can pull down because people just want to be able to understand. It's like veteran, gay, this, that, the other. It's easy for, uncertainty is this great issue that everyone has issues with. It's whatever we can do to provide some form of certainty, put a label on some things, particularly within the veteran community. So many veterans, mate, that I've dealt with are their trauma. So many people in society are their trauma. Like it comes down to trauma 101. Instead of learning from your trauma, some people just carry it for the rest of their lives and it requires others to break them out from it. This is my whole thing, even all the media and stuff I do, people are like, how do we introduce you? When I brought Barry's, they're like, can we call you the gay commando? All these sorts of things. It's just like my whole struggle these days is trying to come down to like my label is my name and like my actions and attitudes. One of the things I loved from my days in the commandos is when you got your beret, it came with this saying, this comes with a daily renewable contract. And that's part of this philosophy that I think we've lost in society. Everyone, it's so easy for me to sit back and rest on my laurels, rest on being special forces, rest on being gay, rest on being the first gay commando, rest on beating the ABC. The hardest part is trying to actually carry those labels, appreciate them, but not let them define you.
Yeah.
Because we're all afraid of like, what's the next label? We don't know what the next certainty is. We don't know what our next selling point is. That uncertainty that lies ahead is the biggest struggle for so many of us. And I'm in that place at the moment, like what's next? And this is where, what's your fucking Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Who are you? Are you looking after all the things that help you achieve that self-actualization to figure out what's next? What are your actual values? I mean, this is the biggest thing that I found personally. When we ran the commando selection course, every single activity, whether it's sorting 100 kilos of brown rice from white rice through to putting together a platoon attack on an enemy position, every single activity had to be designed so that the candidates could be assessed against one or more of the commando values. And you might be taught a new piece of equipment or whatever on the selection course to test trainability, which is one of the values. But otherwise, you're only assessed on basic infantry stuff on the selection course. So we can select the right person because we then have the next 10 to 12 months with the best instructors, the best equipment and time under training to develop you into being a commando. And it all came down to values. And then in the unit, every month when you got your platoon commander's notebook and every end of year when you got your performance appraisal report, there'd be your role that we would assess you against, but we then assess you against those same commando values that we were picked on, and we'd remove people from the unit based on values. And so much of that core identity as a commando came down to values, and so much of like my core identity these days comes down to like my values, because this is the thing, we select people on values knowing that we can train them to achieve any mission. And particularly when the commandos, the mission changed so frequently from domestic counterterrorism to Afghanistan to all this. And as opposed to training someone specifically for one role, you have to have the right person built on the right values that's able to then be trained into whatever role comes. And I think that's more of the mindset I try and bring through. It's like, who are you when COVID hits, when you don't have a job, when you're not allowed to socialize, and when you're sitting in your own environment alone? Like, what are your values? What is the structure you put forward into your actions the next day when your only responsibility is to take your dog for a walk for the 1 hour you're allowed out? And how do you survive that mental health struggle that might go on forever and ever and ever? Sorry, that's my soapbox rant.
No, it's good.
It's decoupling identity from labels, bringing it back to values and understanding all the different elements that actually go into identity. And it's a process. Like, it's an evolving process, mate. I don't have because it's so easy. It's so much more comfortable. For me, it's so much more comfortable to go back to LA and sit within my gay community mates and be happy. And like, I go and do that and I get my fulfillment. But then there's a part of me that is from the military side that's like, cool, but like, what's next? How are you contributing to society? How are you acting in service? How are you demonstrating leadership? And it's that constant struggle. Sometimes you wish you could remove those values of service and leadership, but they're like part of your DNA, and they're a part of your identity that saw you achieve the most self-actualized version of yourself, potentially, which is sort of my experience.
Is that sort of looking for something next, a little bit more service? Is that what kind of pushed you towards the politics side of things?
The whole politics side of the house came from going through every democratic means to hold the ABC accountable, and then saying, fuck this, I'm going to raise a political party. The literal story is, as a part of this whole campaign, like, was it October 2020, the ABC released an article saying my dudes were war criminals. They released it on the exact day, the 21st October, which was the anniversary that we lost Scott. Like, they triggered every bone of my fibre to burn them to the stake for what they've done. And then part of that process was then appreciating how corrupt or how dysfunctional the political system and democratic system was, that they wouldn't even hold the ABC accountable to their own story. Even when I wrote to the ABC, they published this article saying it happened during these dates. Here are my deployment records. We weren't even in Afghanistan. They just went online and changed their articles. That's just like, wow, this is wrong. At the same time, the government was trying to say, hey, we're not going to give you a royal commission into veteran suicide. We're going to appoint this former brigadier as the national commissioner. And next thing, because I had a public profile, all these veterans, particularly Vietnam veterans, are like, no, you need to appreciate this has gone beyond acute PTSD. This is now this moral injury piece I was beginning to understand. And unless we have a royal commission, which is the highest recognition that this is an issue within our land, and not just some, former general, mates of mates, whatever, even though she might not have been, that's what the perceived image is. Like, it's gone beyond practicality. It's now in philosophy. That's when I literally just started walking the doors of Parliament, got Pauline Hanson and Malcolm Roberts to vote for it in the Senate, went to Barnaby Joyce, introduced me to Lou O'Brien. They promised to cross the floor. Within a month, we won the Royal Commission. And I was like, fuck, that's just some tactics, Yeah. But I was bringing compelling arguments and evidence and surveys and all that to them. And then I had all these political parties reach out to me and want me to run for them in the Senate. And I went and had some conversations with some people, and they're like, cool, so we want you to advocate on veteran issues. We want you to advocate on gay issues. We want you to do your first term on the backbench. Then we can look at this. And that's, I was like, this system is fucked. Like, half the politicians I was meeting with, I wasn't talking to the politician, I was talking to their staff member. And the politician's this puppet that is there getting ready for the next press conference. I had that experience with one of the Veterans Affairs ministers, and, it was just fascinating to see behind the curtain and going, nah, man, we can do this better. So set up a party called the Australian Values Party to bring shit back to values. And that's when I learned the unique environment that is the media and politics. Before I ran for politics, I had all these friends in politics who, mate, I've written questions and speeches for senators, for Senate estimates, or on the floor of Parliament. I've written opening, what is it called? Opening editorials for some of Australia's biggest journalists on their own show. But then as soon as you become competition, the media will cut you off, the politicians will cut you off, and throughout the whole campaign, that's when all these attacks sort of came, and then just found didn't have a platform anymore, and lost all influence in what was, at the end of the day, trying to help veterans. And to be honest, I went down this personal spiral of feeling that I needed that as my new purpose for an own ego piece as well, having all these people, sort of church it up. So it was a very interesting time.
Yeah.
Very unique insights. Even in hindsight, sitting here at 38, the lifestyle of going to Canberra every couple of weeks of a month and sitting in a suit from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. and seeing the lifestyle down there, I think I would just be another mentally disturbed person in the parliament. I think it would be the worst thing for my physical and mental health to be a part of that. There are some people who are good politicians. And if I can help provide advice and things like that by not competing, I think that's definitely much more the play. Even over in the US recently, mate, you saw the whole changeover with Kamala Harris and all that coming in. And I know some very powerful and influential friends over there who could very well be at the front of politics or whatever they want to be, but have over their lives appreciated how much more valuable it is to be in a backseat, able to provide influence, able to provide support for the right reasons, not for their own selfish reasons. And I definitely think that's much more of a recipe for a happier life, unless you really need to be out the front for your own personal requirements.
Yeah. I have a theory about politics and politicians, that there is sort of two schools of people that go into it. There's people who are doing it for the power trip and that, look at me, I'm the head of everything. And then there's the other people who genuinely get in it because they have a good heart and they want to do something good for, whatever community or people that they subscribe to.
Yeah.
But by virtue of the game of politics, in order for them to get to the position in which they have the influence to actually make a solid difference, they have to compromise themselves left, right and centre to make deals and wheel and deals, get support from him or her and get the right dinner and rub shoulders. That by the time they get to that point where they can do the influence, they're so compromised they no longer have the ability to influence in the way that they want. Their hands are tied by all the favours that they owe and all the people that have helped them get to that point that they're fucked.
You're not wrong. And that's, for me, where it comes down to the requirement to raise a standard for the people that we accept being politicians. Like some of the best people I have seen in there have been those who don't compromise their standards because they know who they are. They know their values. They know what they stand for, what they're willing to die on a hill for. And you're right. This whole politics, coming from the military, coming from, just military in general. What I find the irony is that just down the road from Parliament House is Adfa and RMC, where we train all army officers, and we're trained in the military appreciation process, in strategic planning, in leadership. And instead, at the highest levels of Australian government, we replace politics. We replace leadership with politics. We replace, doing favours and backdoor deals.
Yeah.
We have a political system that is about, joining a party, so you have the numbers to push legislation through Parliament, as opposed to engaging in deliberate strategic planning processes where you welcome the other side to tear strips off your plan and wargame it and actually put out the best plan. Every single military plan, if we're doing an offensive operation, there's the principles of the attack, there's the principles of defense, there's the principles of war. Every single plan we ever had to develop and deliver had to be justified against the principles of that type of operation. We have an Australian values statement. We spoke about this before, where, every single piece of legislation should have to be briefed against these values or some form of principles. Instead, they're briefed however they're briefed for the party to get their own political persuasion. And for me, if I could again wave the magic wand, I would love to have a parliament that's filled with independents and minor parties and they call it a hung parliament, where people literally have to go into those big ass meeting rooms outside of Parliament and sit there and do deliberate planning with each other. Because as it is, mate, the party develops the plan. Everyone's told to vote for it. If you don't vote for it, you're kicked out. This is meant to be, picture it, your local government. I used to live in, let's say Ferny Grove here in Brizzy. Every 4 years we should get together and elect who we want to be our leader to represent us. And then that leader is meant to represent us. We're in the age of 2024, when there's a piece of legislation that member of Parliament could send out an email and do an online survey of their people saying, hey, how do you think I should vote on this?
Yeah.
And then it goes up, and then it goes up, and it goes up to the next level, And we could then keep a track record of every 4 years, how has this person actually voted in our best interest or in their own?
Yep.
I get it from a place of if it's actually leadership and the leader's required to make a decision that's best for the country based on this, but it's not. It's party politics, and this individual member these days are picked for, their social media following or what their status within the community is, so they can be voted in to then vote the way the party wants to then push the party preference. Yeah.
Yeah. We've also got the issue, though, that society in general, life is so busy and there's so much going on. People don't have the time to sit down and read policies and go through and actually do it. It's becoming more and more of a popularity contest.
Yeah,
They go, I like him. He's got a good personality. Hold on. Take it back for a second. If you've got issues with your tax, do you go and pick an accountant because he's a cool dude and you fucking like the conversation?
Maybe.
Or do you pick the boring cunt over there who's fucking great at his job?
Yeah.
Like, why is running the country, which is infinitely more, responsibility than your and mine taxes?
Well,
why is that?
The biggest difference there is also you can, one, quantify the level of performance. It's very hard to quantify the level of performance of a politician. And two, there's accountability. A taxman fucks up or stuffs up, you're paying a bigger bill.
Yeah.
This is the biggest issue we've found in the last few years with politicians, is that there is no accountability. Someone can do the most stupid things, as you've seen half of them do, and they have to resign. They can get kicked out of the party, but they still own the seat. They still own the Senate seat. The Governor General these days won't even reach down and remove people, whereas back in the day, the Governor General would sack the Prime Minister. Just incredible where we've got to this place. And this is my issue when it comes to values. You only ever need accountability when there's no integrity. You remember back in our military days, mate, if you were ever caught for an integrity issue, you're kicked out. Integrity was the biggest dirty word if you had ever had anything blemish against you. These days, there's no integrity and there's no accountability. So there's absolute chaos. And I remember this vivid memory of the day they were voting for the Royal Commission in the lower house. We got signed in and some of us were sitting up in the viewing area to watch it. And the vote was going to happen after question time. I think question time's in the afternoon. And they bring in all these school kids, and they were primary school kids, they weren't teenagers, up in the viewing gallery, and you can watch. And they were watching question time in Parliament. And I sat there and watched fully grown men and women just calling each other names and carrying on. And I got to this point where it actually triggered me emotionally, and I wanted to stand up and be just yell at the floor. It's what message are you sending to these people upstairs? And these are young people watching the leaders of our nation carry on. And it's all for the cameras, because question time is the one time that's filmed or something.
Yeah.
And just calling people, buffhead and laughing and, you would stab him in the back. And it was stuff. And again, this is probably the military side, stuff that would never, ever be tolerated in any other professional organization or professional workplace, let alone the military. But there it was, in the people's house, the Parliament, paid for by taxpayers, with primary school kids watching. And that was a moment where I was just wow, this system is broken. It's about playing up to cameras. It's about doing whatever you need to do to achieve what your party wants for the political reasons, not for what's best for the people.
Yeah, which is just a sad state of affairs.
It really is. But it just takes, And this is the issue. I don't know. Australia is such a lucky country, and particularly from traveling the world, you get to come back here and see this, from our food through to our security, the fact that we are on our own. Mate, we're on our own tectonic plate. We don't even have fault lines to worry about. It's fascinating. And I'm just so worried that our own sort of ignorance and natural isolation is actually our biggest worst enemy, and it takes big issues. From a veteran perspective, the US is fascinating on their whole thank you for their service and all that. And people like to, poo-poo it, but it comes from a place of having Pearl Harbor, having Twin Towers, having a visceral connection to why they need to have a military. And even though Australia had the bombing of Darwin back in World War II, from what I'm told, the rest of the country didn't know that was happening. I think the other biggest thing we happened was a Chinese miniature sub come into the Sydney Harbour, which we found out about later. We haven't had to feel that.
Yeah.
But it's funny, you go around the world, you go to France, you go to, even Monday Jerusalem was liberated by, the charge of the light horse back in the day.
Yeah.
These other international countries who actually revere our servicemen and women for what they did back in the day on shores overseas, whereas back here in Australia, mate, going to corporates to trying to get them to support the veteran games and all this, it's not a social priority.
Yeah. How did the veteran games come about?
I applied for Invictus a couple of times, and I found the process demoralizing, because I had to sort of justify you have to sort of qualify for Invictus. And it is designed for people who are seriously sick, injured and ill, to get them back into adaptive sports. I just wanted some way of competing and something that sort of linked me back to the military identity as well. And that's when I was like, oh, this isn't for me. But the findings coming out of the Royal Commission were that the highest rate of mental health issues and suicidality, particularly with young men under the age of 40, which is me. And I'd struggled in my own mental health piece. So I was like, well, what can we do to sort of find something in between? Something that helps us get back to as a community. Also, something that helps to demonstrate to the wider public that we are good to go. So instead of playing rugby and pickleball and all that, doing things like obstacle courses and stretcher carries and casualty evacuations and all the stuff that I love designing as the activities for the selection course to show that we are good, but also challenge people and all the rest. So yeah, sort of sat on that for a year or so and came up with it, and then literally just decided to do it.
Yeah.
And mate, I approached the RSLs, I approached government, I approached all these people asking for them. I wanted like RSL to brand it and all this beforehand, and all I got was competition.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and still do. I had to write a cease and desist letter to RSL Australia, this Veteran Games, because they were calling up sub-branches who were sending teams saying, we don't want you involved because they want to do their own. It's wild, mate.
Why not just get behind it?
Well, look, I'm gonna do this. Mate, end of last year, the federal court ruled that the ABC wrongfully defamed an entire commando platoon and called them war criminals. Has the RSL ever made a statement?
No.
Because the RSL president has an issue with me. There's a competitive issue. I've had a stand-up argument with him when he started to compare the Vietnam conflict with the Afghan conflict and say, I will not be lectured by a generation who had a conflict that ran the same duration of ours but had nowhere near the number of casualties. Mate, he sat back in Australia, never deployed to Vietnam. It was on the live stream at a national ex-service organisation conference in Canberra, but we can't get that footage. It's just, anyway. True. This is this quagmire. I love it. When this is one of the best insights that someone provided me. When there was the whole voice campaign and the Uluru statement, we were out. Remember there were the floods in the northern rivers a couple of years ago. So it was before the voice campaign. It was the whole Uluru statement piece. Yeah. I went down there with some people from our charity, Veteran Support Force, because one of my guys actually lost his house, and we just went down there to provide assistance. And because we had a charity, people started providing us with donations, and we just went out and started buying things for people that needed them on the ground. It was just a great setup. And when I was there down at, there's this place called the Koori Mail, which is like a Indigenous First Nations Aboriginal newspaper. And we were down there. I forget the name of the town. I apologise. But these guys came over to me. They were First Nations guys, and they're like, Heston Russell, we've seen you on Sky News. I was like, yep. He's like, come over and have a chat. I was like, okay, sure. They're like, hey, what do you think about the Uluru Statement from the Heart? I was like, guys, definitely not in my knowledge repertoire. They're good. Shut up and listen.
Yeah.
And they turned to me. They're like, hey, have a look around this circle. There's like 5 of them. And they're like, he's like, these guys, they're full-blooded Aboriginals, and I'm from Torres Strait. Yeah. And the guy said, when I say full-blooded Aboriginals, look at them. They're black and they got flat noses. He said that, not me. And I was like, okay. He's
That's
like,
getting clipped.
Oh,
We're getting cancelled for that.
No. He said this to me, mate. And he's like, have a look at some of the footage from people signing that Uluru Statement from the Heart and all that. Like, they're whiter than you. And I was like, okay, sure. I'm not getting into this conversation. He's like, you do a lot of work within the veteran community. We've seen that. Just like, and this is what this guy said, he's like, just like the veteran community, there are elements of our First Nations community who profit off us being victims, who would love to continue to perpetuate the narrative that we are all broken, that we have all these issues, because behind the scenes they are being elevated in society, they are becoming the bureaucrats, they are informing the politicians, they are siphoning off the money, all this, that and the other. And just have a look at what's going on with your veteran hierarchy, with RSL, with all the rest, and who gets most of the attention and where actually most of the influence is coming from, and relate that over to what we're doing. And it was just a fascinating insight for me. And I want to quickly caveat that the RSL, most people don't understand it's federated. So there's national, they're state, and there are sub-branches, and they're all under different constitutions. I have the massive issue at the federal level. Like, I had to fight against them when literally the day we're having the vote for the Royal Commission, the same president got on. I was sitting there in the Qantas lounge, and he got on the news, and he's like, the RSL is against this Royal Commission. And next thing I had the president or the CEO of RSL Queensland and RSL New South Wales calling me saying, he does not speak for us. I was like, cool, we'll clean your own house. It's like, we can't. He's at this constitution, we're at this constitution. This is my biggest issue, and we having this conversation now in September, like the final report for the Royal Commission gets handed down next week. And one of the biggest issues is just how fragmented our veteran community is. You know, I had guys coming to the veteran games who are you're in my age, and they don't feel comfortable going into an RSL. They don't feel comfortable being around pokies and alcohol. They don't feel comfortable going around that. Like, it's a whole network that we need to develop and appreciate. Not one of us has the finite solution, and to accept this diversity of outputs and inputs to make sure we cover off on all the different demographics of veterans. You know, you can't just say you're a veteran, therefore one glove fits all. But there are those who are more focused on position and control and funding and all the rest, in my opinion, that are getting in the way and are being competitive with each other as opposed to collaborative with each other. And my hope is, one, the Royal Commission shines that light, because I've had lots of conversations with the commissioners and Nick Carlos, and I'm pretty sure he gets it, but it's very political. And then the next step forward is how best we work together to achieve that, because all that it's doing is pushing people away and pushing them down into the cracks. And mate, when it comes to the veteran games, we were in our second year this year. We doubled from last year, but people still don't even know it's around. And, you know, we're pushing this product out to sub-branches, out to all these other organisations. And yeah, it's an uphill battle when you, and this is the saddest part for me, having spent the last 2 months in the US. We could take it to the US next year and
they'd get on board.
Big and amazing. And the contacts I have there could probably help me out do that in a heartbeat. But the suicide crisis for this demographic of people is here in Australia. And we're not actually in this to make money out of the event and make it this big TV production, which we know it could be. It's actually to achieve the outcomes. And we could do it next year if we had people get on board and collaborate instead of compete. So anyway, you're going to get me in trouble with this conversation.
No, it'd be fine.
No, it needs to happen. Like, we need to have these conversations.
Yeah.
And the best part about, like, mate, we run it through our charity. Like, you can go online, Veteran Support Force, and go and have a look at the ACNC website and see, you know, we have one paid employee. Her name's Sam. Everyone else is volunteers, myself included. Like, no one draws these big director wages that half of these other big organisations get. But we run this thing on a smell of an oily rag. And the testimonials we get from guys, even younger than you and I, mate, saying, hey, I haven't come out of the house for the last year. Then all of a sudden these guys knocked on my door. We formed a team. Now I'm training up already for the next year. My wife, my kids have said how much it's changed me. Like, that's the small little bits and pieces.
Yeah. Right there is a purpose in itself, even if it's not so massive that your whole life can focus on it. Something to train towards, something to look towards, a goal, something to go after is like invaluable.
And the biggest thing we found particularly is some form of a physical goal. Like, our entire fitness philosophy in the military came from being ready for some form of physical activity, some form of deployment, or just the everyday rigors of military life. It's a very physical role. And so many of the guys and girls I speak to, it's so hard to, like, go to the gym apart from just being healthy. That's fine. But, like, going for a walk and doing all that, just pushing it to that next level and helping them to tap back into part of that identity that made them feel that extra level of performance.
Yeah, that capability.
Yeah. And just being like, hey, and this is the first thing I said when we do the veteran games, is it has to be each year, because I had guys who'd competed in Invictus tell me that every 2 years wasn't enough. They sort of had this lull where they kind of fell off a cliff in between and really lost that bit of purpose. So having people know that, look, it's a year away, but just still maintaining a base level, and then 3 months out getting with their team and develop a next level. Yeah. Now 2 years in a row, and like even physically seeing the difference in their appearance when they turn up from 1 year to the next has been really impressive. And what we know that flows onto their mental health and their emotional health and getting outside and all the rest. And
reconnecting with people with a common interest and a common background as well.
Mate, and this is what we do at the actual event itself is You got 100 veterans there. Then we have all these vendors. And like, mate, we've approached all these organizations saying, do you want to have a stand there and all this? And some of them do, some of them don't. And it's word of mouth. Like you said beforehand, how busy and cluttered the space is. We build a village where you can go over there and speak to this new, cannabis provider, or you can speak to the Axon property guys, or you can speak to, the Atlantis Recovery Center, and there's a recovery center here on the Gold Coast you can go to. And, unless it's there in front of you and you have your mate saying, hey, like what advocate did you go and see and do that? Oh, old mate over there. And, it's just that passage of information that was the old school village.
Yeah, exactly.
It takes a village to raise a kid. It takes a team to achieve a task.
Yeah.
We keep thinking that people can Google online and find this. And, mate, even trying to get a lot of the competitors to complete like waivers and stuff online, how many people are adverse to doing emails and internet stuff because they've spent the last 3 years dealing with DVA and advocates, and they're like, mate, I don't do emails, I don't do this. So we have like paper forms. It's really fascinating what level you need to bring it back. But people sitting in ivory towers and behind computers in Canberra are just like, no, but they should be able to do this. It's like, cool, mate. So the ones that you're losing aren't members of the RSL, aren't members of any veteran organisation. Half the people, 90% of the people don't even want to be a member of our charity, Veteran Support Force. They just want to turn up and compete in the veteran games.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Get them the information there because they're the ones who need it, because the Royal Commission tells us they're the highest at risk, proactive, preventative health interventions.
Yeah.
Not recruitment numbers and membership drives. And, these are the amount of members, therefore give us grants. Like it's just, it does my head in.
It's a quagmire, like you said. It's a painful system to have to try and navigate.
It's also an unaudited system.
Yeah, there's no oversight.
Mate, this is my biggest issue. We've applied for grants 2 years in a row, and there is no means testing on grants. So there are gigantic organisations out there who literally get enough money from donations through to, a national raffle, where they actually get to employ people to write grants for them. And they literally bank tens of millions of dollars each year from their activities and arguably don't need the grants, but because it's equality of opportunity for grants, they end up getting grants that, arguably they don't need the money for. The RSL literally actually has a person who sits in on the recommendation board that provides the recommendations to the minister for decision. Like, it's just ridiculous. So again, I hope that some of this stuff comes out in the Royal Commission. Otherwise, it's here exclusive on
the Life Lead podcast.
There we go.
Yeah.
And these are some of the things, mate. We're talking to some of the politicians leading into the election next year. Like, this shit just has to change, Yeah. Because the more the public wakes up to this, the less they're going to be inclined to support veterans in general, as opposed to just the ones who are arguably not doing it in what I will say, an ethical way.
Yeah.
You have to say, in my opinion, otherwise you can be done for defamation.
Yeah.
Some of the things you learn.
Yeah. So speaking about like the media side of things, you mentioned this spotlight. Do you want to get into that or not?
Well, as at this recording date, we should be fine, unless you all of a sudden...
No, I wouldn't do that.
I don't know. My trust levels are low. No, you're good. This we're on the 6th of September now. Next Sunday, at the start of the year, I spent 3 to 4 months filming this whole Spotlight Channel 7 exclusive on my sort of proceedings with the ABC. Because what happened, mate, once I went to, after 3 years worth of writing letters, doing petitions and all the rest, ended up taking legal action and sent them a concerns notice. And the legalities of that, once you submit a concerns notice, then neither party can sort of publicly have a crack at each other.
Okay.
Because it's kind of before the courts. I probably got that wrong, but anyway, that's my interpretation. And what the ABC, particularly Mark Willisey, their journalist, very quickly did was then went and very quickly published this online segment on the 7:30 report, which was then captured also on the ABC News. That was this footage of what he said was a commando shooting at unarmed civilians. And during that episode, he couldn't name me, but when the ABC then lodged their official affidavit for proceedings, their evidence and the reliance of their truth defence said, we have character of Heston Russell, we have helmet cam footage of Heston Russell shooting at unarmed Afghan civilians from a Black Hawk helicopter, blah, blah, blah. So while the story never said it was me, this did. And there was later...
The inference.
Yeah. Well, it was later then linked. And then the mates the ABC and the Guardian, from what I'm told, have a very unique. The Guardian newspaper have a very unique sort of left wing friendship, and then the Guardian publish exclusive. Heston Russell allegedly shot at civilians. Says the ABC to make sure they're acquitted of any issues there as well. And what happened was I went and watched the online segment they put out. They got this footage from this end of trip highlights video that we used to do at the end of every trip. And it's two segments. One is shooting at this dude in a compound that he's ducking and weaving, and you never get to see the front of him. I know, because I went before the Burton team and got questioned on it, and we broke it down to 10/100ths of a second, and you never get to see. And then there's a separate piece where there's this guy running in this alley. And in the end of trip video, those two bits of video are cut separately. So the guy in the compound appears in the highlights video before the guy in the alleyway. But I have the raw helmet cam footage, and the guy running in the alleyway is actually the guy who then runs into a compound, picks up a weapon, and isn't the guy in the compound. So Mark Willisey brought in this guy, Glenn Colomitz, a military lawyer who I actually did a whole press conference with Jackie Lambie. They're very smart. They bring out the people who were my supporters to then be against me. And Glenn was a legal officer, and he should know better than sit there and pontificate with a journalist about 15 seconds worth of footage. So I'm fucking dirty about that, but I'm sure he's going to hang his head over this anyway. And what happened was there were 6 shots fired in this snippet at the guy in the compound ducking and weaving. What they don't have, and is brought out in the full helmet cam footage, is we've been watching this dude. We've got drones overhead. Drones tell me sitting on the headset in the middle of the helicopter, he's picked up something that looks like a weapon. I authorize my guy, and you hear it in the full version, shoot him, shoot him, shoot him. What the ABC did in the editorial process was, and the guy running in the alleyway, the same dude, that engagement is a single round. I authorized my guys to fire warning shots, and it worked magnificently. We had spotters, we had all this sort of stuff. And particularly, you have a guy on an intercom or you have a guy running, fire a shot. The normal reaction, if they're not insurgents, to put their hand up and stop, or 9 times out of 10 they did. This dude kept running. Single warning shot. He then runs in, picks up a weapon, authorized my guy to shoot him. What they did for their online article was they grabbed that 6-round noise and superimposed it onto the single shot. They added 5 extra gunshots to the second sequence, and then also in the footage circled 2 civilians and said, here, blatantly shooting at unarmed civilians running in a whole thing. Now, this is the head fuck, mate. This was September 20... Oh, when was it? Court case was last year. September 2022. September 2022, was it 2022? Anyway, it was 2 years ago, nearly 2 years ago now, they put this online. And I have the raw helmet cam footage, and I sat there with my legal team. I was like, they've literally added gunshots to this footage. I wasn't allowed to speak out about it because it was during the court case. But for 3 iterations of hearings, the ABC kept saying, no, we have this footage, we have this footage. I gave, through my lawyers to the ABC lawyers, the raw helmet cam footage of the whole thing and offered to talk them through it. Because 2 things. In the footage, the guy who's shooting turns his head and there's me sitting in the middle of the helicopter on the headset. It's not even me shooting. And the second part is the rest of the footage is we then go in and land, and I move to the front, and my dude, who's my signaller, moves up behind me, and we go to capture this dude. And next thing, we get ambushed and we're in a firefight. Clearly not unarmed civilians.
Yeah.
So conveniently, after that, the ABC made up another reason why they had to drop their truth defense. Still never went online and changed any of their articles, left them online, the Guardian online, all the rest. So at the end of the court case, I was still horrified by this. And I'm like, they've literally gone online and changed footage to try and frame Australian soldiers as shooting multiple shots at unarmed civilians who weren't even unarmed civilians. So I was going to put together a YouTube video, do it myself. And I got introduced to a guy called Mark Llewellyn, who was the head of Spotlight. And I literally had him come over to my apartment and I played the footage that they did. Then I showed him mine, and he fell off the stool. And I was like, I knew it was bad. He's like, Heston, they have literally edited footage to add gunshots.
Yep.
And I was like, yeah, I know. Am I like not going crazy here? He's like, mate, we were running with this story. So, we built a whole story around that. And it was meant to go to air in April. And then there were all sorts of issues within Spotlight, change of hierarchy and all this. So it got delayed. So now it's going to go ahead in September. And I'll tell you what, mate, having to sit on this secret for nearly 2 years has been so tough.
Oh, yeah.
And knowing that it's coming, but also then having this reservation of like, if this doesn't bring about public outcry, if this doesn't bring about these people losing their jobs, if this doesn't bring about some form of reform to the ABC, like, where are we at? Do I want to be a part of this country anymore? Like, could I be fucked? What this has done to me and my family and what these people were willing to do while trying to say that we're war criminals in the court of public opinion when proven wrong in the federal fucking court. This is it. At the end of my defamation case, I got paid a bunch of money that I didn't care about. All I wanted was an apology for my soldiers and for these people to be held accountable. And the ABC managing director just sat and sent estimates and said, I'll not apologise. So for me, mate, if he doesn't apologise, if he doesn't lose his fucking job, because the best part that will also come out of this is that when the ABC submitted their affidavit, that exact footage of me, of who they thought was me shooting out of the helicopter, back in 2021 when I ran for politics, they had that video sent to one of their internal video guys, and he sent back and said, hey, I don't think we can say this is Heston Russell because the weapon has a different serial number to a bunch of all the videos that he'd been putting out on his YouTube and stuff, because I've been putting out actual proper stuff. So they're like, oh, okay, well, we can't, categorically say it is. Now, that was this different journalist. Then, just last minute when I submitted my concerns notice, this journalist, Mark Willis, who rushed in, said, I don't care that we don't think it's him. I'm publishing it in what we believe and what I believe was an attempt to deter me from progressing through with my case. So what's happened at an organisational level is the ABC has committed perjury. And I don't have to say in my own opinion, because at an organisational level, there are people within the ABC who knew that that probably wasn't me shooting, but they have submitted as evidence in a federal court of Australia that they knew was wrong, that they knew was probably not me. And in the stand, under cross-examination, my barrister, Sue Chrysanthu, got both Mark Willisey and Josh Robertson, who was the other journalist who got the guy to do the video analysis, to admit that they knew that it probably wasn't me. But that wasn't picked up. So this is the whole issue. Defamation law is civilian court. Perjury is criminal. So what should happen from the end of this, if we were in a proper democratic law-abiding world, is the New South Wales DPP, Director of Public Prosecution, should then pick this up and say, hey, the ABC's committed perjury. We need to open a case on this to hold these people to accountable. This is where I'm in this unique position of having gone through the last 3-4 years of this and having all of my hopes built up to accountability standards, everything, values that we bring through from our service to what we hope is the Australia we fight for at the end of the day. Yeah. And I'm sort of sitting here going, I hope these things happen. I'm sadly in a place where I no longer expect them to happen. Yeah. Which is, to me, as a 5th generation veteran, so sad to have to set my expectations to that being the most likely reality, because I've kind of lost faith in the checks and balances of this country. And to kind of sit here going, like, if that is the situation, like, is this a country I want to be a part of? Yeah. But I don't have the luxury of a under 35-year-old visa to go
to Canada. Lie. Yeah. Perjure yourself. Yeah. Lie about your age.
And it's really, this is where I find myself mentally and emotionally in this really adrift place where I'm coming to the culmination of, like, my whole thing, mate, is I've gone online, hestonrussell.com/veterans, to form a Veterans Protection Act that simply says, based on what we've learned from this whole Afghanistan Breton Report debacle, no media can report on any individual or any unit as being accused of war crimes until they've been through a criminal court and found guilty. So what we're trying to say is that you can report that a member of the Australian Defence Force is believed to have committed a war crime, and what that does is it puts it on the Defence Force and it puts it on the Department of Defence to step up. part of my moral injury comes from me writing to Peter Dutton when he was Defence Minister with my deployment order saying, hey, the ABC said this happened June, July 2012. I wasn't in Afghanistan, nor were my soldiers. Can you please speak up? And 30 days later, I got a lovely handwritten letter saying, dear Heston, I've always thought the members of our Defence Force deserve greatest recognition. If you need any support, including mental health or wellbeing support, please contact the
Open Arms. Yeah.
Well, it was the crew responsible for the inquiry in Afghanistan. I was like, lip service.
Yeah.
Like, you could shut this down. The kicker for me, mate, is that footage that the ABC changed, the Department of Defence has. They have that video. It was part of the Brereton report.
Yeah.
Why no one has gone from Defence and seen that they've done that? The triple kicker is that whole conversation that I had with the helicopter pilot, with the drones, hey, he's picked up a weapon. They're all recorded. Every operational communication was recorded and is sitting somewhere within an Australian or US archive. Like, we always knew that. Everything was recorded. Why, again, the Defence Department hasn't stepped up to do that? Simple wins.
Yeah. And what does that say to future warfighters when they go out? Like, the amount of hesitation that men are going to have, like we spoke earlier about mine and other soldiers' hesitation just on the back end of the unfortunate one commando incident. You look at the Brereton report and all these investigations, and if people are guilty, fine, no dramas. But if they're not, and they get zero support, what does that tell the fighting force that's going to put their lives on the line potentially in World War III or whatever happens, any future conflicts?
Yeah.
Are they? How many people are going to step up to the plate?
Let's look at where we're at. We actually have the hindsight of 4 years worth of history now. We're in September. What is it? October 2020. The Brereton report was released. One person has been charged. One person has been charged, not found guilty, charged.
Yeah.
3,500 Special Forces personnel have gone through the last 4 years of the uneducated public hearing that you're part of Special Forces, you're part of Afghanistan, therefore you are under the cloud of suspicion. We've gone through, federal defamation cases. Myself, Ben Robert Smith, no one's been charged. ABC's been found guilty, and the ABC is about to have found, like, the national media that every Australian taxpayer pays $70 a year for the ABC is about to be found that they're willing to go to the level of changing footage and adding gunshots in order to support a narrative against someone that was found to be wrong in the federal court and still not even lose their job. Like, this is where we're at. It's white collar crime at the highest level at the expense of our veterans, who are the people who are meant to be the custodians of all these rule of law and, democracy. We're the ones at the end of the day who are meant to defend. Well, sorry, current serving members are the ones that are meant to defend. How do, about aligning people with purpose. Where does that leave us as far as a purpose for our military?
It's disgraceful.
Yeah.
It really is.
My hope, mate, is that people get angry about this stuff because I am done. Also, from a personal perspective, I'm done fighting. Like, I never thought I would say that, but like, this has overtaken my life for the past 4 years. Even when I was in the US the last few months and I was told that this was going to go to air, I speak with my psychiatrist once a week. I've now been speaking with him twice a week. This has sort of triggered. I have this paranoia. Once you're within a conspiracy theory, you then prove it correct.
Yeah.
I've learned this through therapy with my psychiatrist. It has really fucked with my mental state. I now question everything. I now think that everyone is out to get me. I now think that everyone has an ulterior motive. I find it so hard to trust people. Even this recent relationship experience that I had, like, I just could not sit stable in any form of comfort or joy. I question everything. Everything is a threat. Everything is sort of out to get me. People being nice to me for some sort of reason. And it's going to take me, and it is taking me, a whole healing process. I know that's going to come out of hopefully finally having this story in public. But, healing and trauma, I've learned through the Royal Commission, takes two things. It takes recognition and it takes accountability. And I'm just worried from like a personal perspective, if these people aren't held accountable for literally changing this footage and doing all this, like, what is there left to do?
Yeah, exactly right.
I don't know. And instead of sitting here going insane, I'm kind of just holding out for hope. I'm holding out for hope that there's a federal election next year and people can make enough noise. But yeah, for me, like, I don't know. I'm interested in where you sort of sit. Where I sit, I'm like, this is the most shocking thing I never even thought would happen, like in my generation, where our taxpayer-funded media changes footage to add gunshots. Like, it's just the most hard to comprehend.
Yeah. I would love to be hopeful,
Yeah.
but I find myself more and more a skeptic these days, and
Isn't
a
that
bit of a
sad?
realist. It is, because at the end of the day, you want to be hopeful about things. You want to believe that things are going to get better. But I think largely the apathy will be a big thing. People go, "Oh, okay, yeah, that sucks," and they'll just move on with their lives.
Yeah.
And, because it doesn't affect their individual bubble.
Yeah.
Is the biggest thing, and I think it's sad, because it is something that it's important that these people are held accountable for that kind of thing. But also look at the ABC as it's a propaganda arm of the government as well. So is the government going to crack down real hard on it if it can utilize it? Like it's basically going to do a cost-based analysis of benefit versus,
This is where I hold out on my hope. The last census in 2021 identified there's something like 581,000 veterans in Australia, and each of us are pretty influential people, at least for our immediate friends and family.
Yeah.
Let's, say that 1 or 2 million people, if that voter base gets angry enough, like that's big numbers for the government. Even if just, veterans of old in particular, and young veterans, seeing what's willing to happen to express that outrage and to be able to channel that outrage into our democratic systems to hold our government accountable. Like it's only through those combined voices that we can make change be achieved. But
on the hopeful side, I think if you look around, I think the silent majority on a myriad of issues, myriad of issues are starting to go. I think the pendulum has swung a little bit too far in whatever the issues are.
Yeah.
I think they're getting to a point where they're starting to get restless and go, I'm sick of hearing about this or that. And
that's it.
It's time to stand up and actually be not so silent about things. So on a hopeful note, hopefully that's...
hopefully it's seen as the actual crime that it is,
Yeah.
Because if you bypass this, anyway.
Yeah.
We shall see.
Yeah. We shall see.
I look forward to when this comes out and we'll be able to say,
good.
well, nothing happened, or holy shit, the plan finally worked. Yeah.
Look, I'll, a bit over 2 hours
Push
now.
that. Yeah.
Well, which is fine. That's fine.
Cool.
I'll hit you with a final question and we'll wrap it up. What's a piece of advice you wish someone had given you when you were younger?
My favorite quote is, don't be the only person holding yourself back. And that is just the constant. We had these conversations about labels. We had these conversations about what you're exposed to, all the rest. I have just found, I've had the privilege of running into some people in my life who have never had any people around them telling them what they couldn't achieve, and just seeing where that mindset has taken them from a response. Like they had people that provided great influence, love, values, great, discipline and constructs, and taught them, the value of hard work and earning your way and all the rest. And I don't know if it's an Australian thing or whatever it is. I've found so many places where people, and I've listened to so many people saying like, you can't do that, you can't do this, you can't do that. And how much that's stuck with me, or how much I've been fearful of putting myself out there because of whatever experience. And every single time where I have found the fortitude to not care what other people think and to finally be the person to get outside of my own way, the things I've been able to achieve, like even walking the corridors of Parliament to win over the Royal Commission, is one of the greatest insights I've had. I was so fearful. I'm like, who the fuck am I? I know nothing. But I did my work. I did surveys, and I just went to doors and started knocking and started having conversations. And next thing, Pauline Hanson on the spot is like, we're voting for this, not the National Commissioner. I walked into Barnaby Joyce's office and he's like, you need to come meet Lou. We're both crossing the floor on this. And I was like, I am nobody. I'm not a platoon commander. I don't have any rank or privilege. I have nothing. I just have the hard work I put in. And I find myself back in this position where I'm the only person in my own way at the moment, and it's a hard thing to push through. But my biggest piece of advice is, don't be the only person holding yourself back, followed by find the people that help you achieve that mindset. And I think that's been one of my biggest failings, coming from being a fat, unpopular high school kid, putting value into people who made me feel popular, who made me feel valuable, as opposed to people who helped me be accountable to what matters in this world and what my values are. And it's taken some big things to help declutter that space, and I'm still learning that as I pursue a relationship and all the rest. But yeah, finding those people who will call your bullshit, who will be there for you when you need them at their lowest, and you'll be there for them as well. I think it's that's my two little bits.
I like
maybe.
that. I resonate very much with getting out of your own way for sure. That is a big hurdle I've had, and a big hurdle that I think a lot of people have. Like particularly for me for film, getting into acting was something I'd always wanted to do, and it had been something that I looked at and I was like, the same sort of, I'm a nobody, I'm not going to get anywhere. And what's the chance? It's like winning a lottery. Like I'm never going to be Hemsworth. I'm not going to be, earning good money, doing all that and enjoying myself. And I got to a point where I just had this epiphany one day sitting in the mines in the lunchroom. And I was like, what's stopping me? I was like, there is actually nothing stopping me from trying, at least. I may not get there, but the only thing that's stopping me from doing it is me just not doing it.
Yeah.
I know how to go on Google and Google the steps to do this. Let me just find out what the first step is and just take the first step, and then the second step, and we'll go. And 8 years later, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
I'm still not Thor.
No.
But I'm going after it, and it's that getting out of your own way and just going, fuck it, man, just do it. Who cares what people think? People are going to laugh. There's always going to be someone behind your back laughing.
Yeah.
But who gives a fuck? Who cares?
And it's finding that place, and this is where I'm fascinated. People watching this podcast, whatever, having a comment, like I just don't know. I think there is a part of Australian culture that is part of that influence, and that is probably why I enjoy my time in the US so much. And we said before off camera, like every time I've met people over there or seen people over there who want to go and do something, there's always been a crowd of people who are like, yes, you go, you get it, we'll be there to support you. There's such a promotion of sort of individual effort, and you got to earn your way. But here, every time I feel like put your hand up to do something, there's people just waiting. There's more people looking to pull you down, to push you up. Yeah. Maybe that's just me seeing the glass as half empty instead of half full, but I just have always felt this different cultural shift. And I think if I go back, one of the biggest pieces of advice I would give my younger self is to travel a hell of a lot more and get out there and see those different perspectives.
Yeah.
Because I just find we're so isolated and insulated here. And the more times I travel overseas, one, I come back to Australia with a greater appreciation of what we do have. But two, just literally learning that people can think differently, can be different, and different exposures, and really, different cultures and real diversity based on real lived experience has really helped me to provide so much more perspective, and again, just help to appreciate so much more. I think I still got so much more to travel. But yeah, I wish I would definitely do more of that.
Yeah. Let me know if you make it to Canada, mate.
Mate, I love it.
Grab a beer.
The issue is Canadians are too much. I love Canadians. They're so much like us, but they're the most positive people in the world.
Yeah.
So
I'm looking forward for it. Well, mate, thank you so much for taking time out of your, what we've now learned is a very unbusy schedule.
At the moment, it's pretty quiet.
Here and hang out. But I've appreciated your candor, mate, your rawness,
my pleasure.
Letting the walls down. It's good.
Thanks for having these conversations, mate. Thanks for providing the platform for doing it, and I hope it takes off and you get sponsors and you crush it and
hopefully
kill it in Canada.
One day.
Lots of g'days.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Thanks for coming on, dude. Catch you later, lids.
Clap.